Chapter 221. If Miss Su really agreed, wouldn't His Highness? Eunuch's son glanced sideways and sized up Bailey Jiaju's expression. The people outside were still yelling. I only proposed this marriage because I pity you. If General Wu didn't like your figure, who would want you based on your looks and style? You still have the cheek to come to the auction. Why don't you take out a mirror and look at your poor appearance, you uncontented little... She didn't get to say the word bastard. Then she heard a bang. He was sent flying several meters away by a vicious kick. The madam only felt that her internal organs were in pain, and there was a fishy taste in her mouth. She struggled on the ground trying to get up. Helian Weiwei stood at the side, lifted her long leg and stepped on the back of her hand. Her eyes were filled with a cold light. She easily lifted the madam's other arm and pinched her throat. The corners of her mouth carried a smile like a devil's. That's why I said, it would have been fine if you had just stayed put. You just had to make me do it. One must know that the madam who came here was from a wealthy family. Helian Vivian's kick was almost a challenge to the authority of the entire aristocratic circle. In an instant, everyone was like a grasshopper in a pot. One by one they surrounded Helian Vivian. Chun Yifeng looked at Helian Vivian worriedly. He blocked left and right, trying to use his status to stop the soldiers from acting rashly. However, the people of Profound Heaven certainly wouldn't allow anyone to make trouble in their own territory. The shopkeepers outside also rushed over. The shopkeeper obviously knew Madame Su. Seeing her give him a look, he angrily waved his hand and said, "What's the matter? Is Profound Heaven a place for people like you? You, troublemaker. Get out of here now. You don't even have a reservation ticket and you dare to come here and make trouble." Whoosh! Helian Vivian narrowed her eyes coldly. Her fingers spread slightly and a glittering golden card appeared in her palm. There were only 2 words engraved on the front of the card, Profound Heaven. When the shopkeeper saw the golden card, his legs went soft and he almost knelt on the ground. Gold card. Profound Heavens only gave out 2 gold cards. Not because of anything else but because Profound Heavens had 2 bosses. The gold card has been a symbol of their identity since they opened the shop. However, other than a few senior managers, no one had actually seen this golden card. How could it be in Helian Vivian's hands? The shopkeeper's face turned pale and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. This is, say it again. Who are you telling to get lost? Helian Vivian stared coldly at the middle-aged man who was shorter than her. The shopkeeper shuddered violently. Helian Jiaoer couldn't stand it anymore. Sister, how can you talk to the shopkeeper like that? Miss Jiaoer, it's okay. It doesn't matter what you say. The shopkeeper hurriedly waved his hand, sweating profusely as he stood there, repeating one sentence. The Helian Jiaoer frowned. Shopkeeper, my eldest sister doesn't know how to be polite. You can just take her away. Mother won't do anything. After all, she was the one at fault first. Take who? That was their boss. The shopkeeper's thoughts had been in a mess since the beginning. After hearing Helian Jiaoer's suggestion, his face turned even uglier. He looked at Helian Vivian, wishing he could find a hole to hide in. The situation was getting worse. Housekeeper Zhang, who was busy setting up in the building, heard the report and hurried over. He was stunned when he saw the figure that was surrounded. You're finally here, Housekeeper Zhang. Su Yanemo didn't look at Housekeeper Zhang's expression. She felt that it was about time for her to speak. She was only thinking about her own goal and smeared Helian Vivian's reputation. I can't control such a spoiled brat. She didn't even say a few words and she hit someone. She has no respect for the law. Housekeeper Zhang glanced at Helian Vivian, who was smiling faintly, then turned to Madame Su and said politely, "It's better to ask what's going on." Housekeeper Zhang. Su Yanemo stood up straight and said with a hint of arrogance, "You don't have to give me face and let this brat go. She's no longer a member of the Defense Division. You can do whatever you want with her. The Defense Division can't afford to have such a vile creature." This has nothing to do with Madame Su. Housekeeper Zhang stood there politely with his hands folded in front of him. It was the standard standing posture of an old housekeeper. Those who knew him well would notice that there was respect in his politeness that had never been there before. Su Yanemo enjoyed it very much. She thought that Housekeeper Zhang's respect was directed at her. She raised her chin even higher and said, "Housekeeper Zhang, I know that you think that this brat is my stepdaughter, so you can't do anything to her. There's no need at all. From today onwards, not only is she no longer related to the Hellion family, she can forget about entering the defense division." The old housekeeper didn't say anything and frowned. He didn't know how to tell Madame Su that he wasn't being courteous to her at all. In fact, the defense division had already been blacklisted by Wei World since the last time. He really couldn't understand where Madame Su's self-confidence came from. "Mother, ask housekeeper Zhang to quickly get someone to take eldest sister away, so that she won't do anything that will damage the family's reputation." Hellion Jiaoer was even more arrogant and directly ordered housekeeper Zhang around as if he was her servant. Upon hearing this, Hellion Vivian sneered and kicked the person under her foot away with her long leg. She retracted her hand and slowly adjusted her collar. That indifferent attitude made her seem even more ruthless. "Old Zhang, I didn't know that other than my words, you would listen to other people's orders." Her voice was neither loud nor soft. It echoed in the noisy street, but it was unusually cool and cold. Su Yanmo's fingers stiffened and a bad premonition suddenly surged in her heart. What did she mean by that? Everyone turned back to look. They saw housekeeper Zhang, who had always been calm and unapproachable, put his left hand on his right shoulder and said in a serious and respectful manner, "Boss, this old servant takes your salary. Other than your orders, no one else will and can't order this old servant around." Boss? Who was he calling? Very good. Hellion Weiwei's lips curved into a smile as she paused between each word. "I thought that my shop had been changed owners." Housekeeper Zhang looked at Su Yanmo and pointed out, "No, it's just that some people have overstepped their boundaries." Su Yanmo's whole body trembled. Her eyes slowly widened. When she looked at Hellion Weiwei again, it was as if her face had been slapped by someone. She could even hear the crisp sound of the slap. She felt extremely embarrassed in her heart. Even that originally arrogant smile also froze at the corner of her mouth. Not only her, but even Hellion Jiaoer and the students who wanted to curry favor with Hellion Jiaoer to enter the auction, as well as many madams from famous families, were all stunned. Chapter 222. Wow! There was an unprecedented uproar on the street. The extremely mysterious boss of Profound Heavens, who even the imperial family had never seen before, was Hellion Vivian? How was this possible? Even Eunuch Sun, who was standing on the second floor, exclaimed and turned to look at His Highness. Bailey Jiaju supported the side of his face with one hand and played with the teacup in the palm of his hand with the other. The small teacup turned back and forth between his fingertips. Just as it was about to fall, it fell between his other fingers. At this time he was looking at Hellion Vivian. His long and narrow eyes flashed with a stronger appreciation than before. But in the next moment, that appreciation turned into an iceberg when he remembered the name of this martial arts company. Profound Heavens. Just by hearing these 4 words he knew what it meant. She really hid it from him. Did she like it that much? So much that she couldn't wait to use their names to become famous? Beligaju's face turned cold. His fingers clasped the teacup so hard that he didn't even realize it himself. The retired emperor was shocked because the reason why the imperial family's fighting strength had become stronger recently was because of Profound Heavens armaments. Only Profound Heavens could supply such a large amount of armaments, and the price was also the cheapest. This was very important for the development of a battle team. So even the retired emperor had always wanted to find an opportunity to meet this legendary martial arts master. He didn't expect that it would be this girl. Downstairs, Chen Yifeng was even more stupefied. He stared blankly at Hellion Vivian. "Boss, are you really the boss of Profound Heavens?" "Yes, I am." Hellion Vivian smiled lightly. Chen Yifeng still felt like he was dreaming. "But aren't you usually in the academy? How do you have time to do this during class?" "During class, I'm always doing martial arts." Hellion Vivian's voice faintly interrupted him. Chen Yifeng stared blankly for a moment. Then he laughed out loud and said in a clear voice, "So it turns out that you were practicing martial arts, not sleeping. Boss, you deceived everyone." "Mainly sleeping and occasionally doing martial arts." Chen Yifeng was speechless. Hellion Vivian patted him on the shoulder, and then looked into Steward Zhang's eyes. She glanced at the shopkeeper who was still sweating and said, Dismiss them and tell them that profound heavens is just profound heavens. It has nothing to do with any family. If anyone has anything to do with it, they should get lost. The last 3 words made the shopkeeper fall to the ground in an instant. Hellion Jiaoer opened her mouth, wanting to say something. Hellion Vivian then turned her head, her eyes sweeping over them inch by inch, her long sleeves fluttering in the wind. Old Zhang, according to the rules of profound heavens, those without a silver card, no matter who they are not allowed to enter the auction. Pass down the order. These people in the future in profound heavens, no matter how much money they take out, they will not be able to get a single armament. Boom! Those who originally thought that they would definitely be able to enter were completely dumbfounded. Especially those students from the White Academy. They were so regretful that even their intestines turned green. Their fingers lightly clenched, and their faces were ashen. Seeing this scene, Chun Yifeng was very excited. He knew that he was right to recognize this boss. Every time, just when people thought that Hellion Vivian was only SOSO and could be trampled on by others, in the next moment, she would use an unexpected way to slap those people in the face. Her arrogant posture, handsome and shocking. Hellion Vivian, don't you think that you are too self-righteous? You just made a single armament, and you dare to say such harsh words to us. The students were all spoiled since childhood. Where would they be able to endure such anger? They arrogantly shouted. Believe it or not, my father can shut down profound heavens with just a word. Hellion Vivian glanced sideways with a bloodthirsty smile. She did not look at them, but asked Steward Zhang, "Who is his father?" "Minister Li from the Ministry of Appointments." Steward Zhang took a look and immediately knew who it was. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "Minister Li, who is in charge of purchasing armaments for the imperial court? How about it? Now you know how to be afraid." The student raised his chin. "Most of the armaments in profound heavens are bought by my father." Hellion Vivian raised her eyes, and her smile became wider. "Pass down the order. Stop all the armaments supplied to the Li family. If the imperial court sends someone to ask, just say that we are not happy with this business and will not do it." "Yes." Steward Zhang lowered his eyes. The student's expression stiffened. "Hellion Vivian, don't be too arrogant. Without the Li family, I would like to see how you can open your armaments business." Hellion Vivian sneered. "Noisy. Old Zhang, take him away and beat him." "How dare you?" As soon as the student raised his head, Hellion Vivian gave him a kick. She stepped on his back valiantly, moved her fingers, and took the wooden chair next to her. She stepped on him with cold eyes. "Why wouldn't I dare?" Puff. After being kicked and stepped on like this, the student surnamedly spat out a mouthful of blood. His appearance was extremely bleak. The scalps of the crowd were numb, and they took a step back in fear. Hellion Vivian just took out a handkerchief and gently wiped the bloodstains on her fingertips. She was like a flower that bloomed in hell, enchanting and bloodthirsty. "I, Hellion Vivian, don't have other hobbies, but I like to slap people's faces. Do you think that I won't do it just because you are the young master of the Li family? Today I, Hellion Vivian, will say one thing. No matter what your identity is, no matter how much money you have, don't think that you can escape unscathed after scolding me." After saying this, Hellion Vivian glanced sideways. "Who else scolded me just now?" "Old Zhang. Beat them all until they admit defeat." Everyone stepped back in horror and watched as 2 or 3 people from profound heavens were pinned to the ground by the people from profound heavens and slapped twice on their faces. Such a bloody way of doing things had firmly intimidated many people. Hellion Jiaoer was angry and wanted to go over. Su Yanmo held her hand and gestured for her to look at the tea house next to them. Hellion Jiaoer only then noticed that among the group of people standing opposite, there was a chess piece that her father had buried in the palace. So the retired emperor was here too? Hellion Jiaoer understood her mother's meaning, and let Hellion Vivian do as she pleased until she finally lost her life. She did not believe that the retired emperor would have any good impression of such a despicable person. Later, he would definitely send someone to punish this little bastard. This was also the reason why the student from the academy shouted with a swollen face, "Hellion Wei Wei, if you have the guts, why don't you step on me like this? When my father comes, you'll die a horrible death." Hellion Vivian sneered and pinched the student's chin with her fingers. "You should ask your father first. How did he negotiate with profound heavens?" Chapter 223. Whether this deal succeeds or not, it's not up to your father, but up to me, Hellion Vivian. Originally, I was still considering whether to accept this deal, but now that I hear you say this, I won't accept it. Seeing this, the retired emperor couldn't sit still. The reason why he specially sent someone to discuss this deal was because he wanted Profound Heavens to only provide a large number of martial cultivators to the imperial family. Now the retired emperor stood up in anger, his eyes deeply looking at the corner of the second floor, his voice carrying the oppressive feeling of wind and rain. I didn't expect Minister Li to have such a competitive and loving son. Just this sentence alone made Li lie, who was accompanying the officials, so scared that his forehead overflowed with sweat. He wanted to reach out and wipe it away, but he didn't dare to move. The retired emperor continued, "Your desire to win has already reached the point of lawlessness. Using the authority given by this emperor to threaten martial cultivators? This emperor wants to ask, who gave you this authority?" As the last sentence left his mouth, the teacup in his hand was also ruthlessly thrown out, smashing into the side of the Li family official. A loud crash sounded. That person surnamed Li immediately bent his legs and knelt on the ground with a bang. His forehead couldn't help but kowtow. "Retired Emperor, please spare me, retired Emperor, please spare me." This official didn't teach his son well, which is why he has such an arrogant and willful temperament. "Don't tell this emperor. You go down now and apologize to Hellion Vivian until she is satisfied." The official with the surname Li kept saying yes, and then followed Eunuch's son out of the tea house. Murong Changfeng was somewhat absent-minded. Even when the tea stained his fingers, he didn't notice. He just looked at Hellion Vivian sitting in the middle, his chest churning. That kind of emotion came inexplicably. Murong Changfeng couldn't tell if it was regret, annoyance, or anger. She was actually this powerful? When did this happen? Why didn't she tell him? Didn't that person think of him first no matter what happened? However, right now, Wei Wei was only motionless in all 8 directions. She sat there lazily like a spoiled brat, looking like she was about to start a massacre. "Hellion Vivian, aren't you afraid that your actions will reach the ears of the retired emperor?" Young Master Li, who was being stepped on by her, still attempted to use the retired emperor's authority to intimidate her. However, Hellion Vivian strongly disagreed. "Then let it reach the ears of the retired emperor." Unexpectedly, as soon as she finished speaking, Eunuch's son and Lord Li from the Ministry of Appointments walked over. When Madame Su saw this, the corners of her mouth curled up. It was finally here. Although the process was out of her control, the result was still the same. The Emperor Emeritus finally couldn't stand Hellion Vivian and sent someone down. Young Master Li had the same thought as Madame Su. Seeing his father appear, he shouted before he even got close, "Father, you have to teach this damn woman a lesson. No matter what, our Li family represents the retired emperor. How dare she?" Slap! Before the young master of the Li family could finish his words, he was slapped by Lord Li, causing him to become dizzy. "Father!" Young Master Li covered his bruised and swollen face. He was completely dumbfounded. Why did his father hit him? Lord Li looked at Hellion Vivian ingratiatingly. "Boss Wei, look, this is all my son's fault. Please don't take it to heart, don't take it to heart." Lord Li, Hellion Vivian crossed her legs, looking very cool like a queen. "You're too polite. Young Master Li just said that you're rich and overbearing and look down on Profound Heaven's armaments. Whether you buy or not depends on your mood. Since you're here, I'll ask Manager Zhang to talk to you about stopping the cooperation." Misunderstanding. This is all a misunderstanding. Young Master Li grabbed Hellion Vivian's sleeve, as if he was afraid that Hellion Vivian would really not do business with him. A dignified first-rank official had to beg Hellion Vivian like this. Rather than saying that Madame Su did not want to believe it, it was better to say that she did not want to see this scene at all. In an instant, those students who wanted to use their status to pressure people paled, especially young Master Li. He did not even dare to believe that his father had always been doing well. When had he ever been so submissive in front of others? Unless it was the retired Emperor. Hellion Vivian smiled. "It is inevitable that there will be misunderstandings in the business world. It's just that young Master Li seems to look down on me, always thinking that I only have one business deal with the Li family." "No, absolutely not." Lordly swallowed his saliva and explained, "This business deal is not the Li families. It is a collaboration between Boss Wei and the retired emperor. We both value this business deal very much." Hellion Vivian glanced at him. "In that case, let young Master Li express his sincerity." Lordly reached out and pulled young Master Li to the side. His face full of anger. "Hurry up and apologize to Boss Wei." Young Master Li was most afraid of his father. His face was pale with fright, and there was no trace of the arrogance from before. Boss Wei, I was wrong. You were too quiet, I didn't hear you clearly." Hellion Vivian sat lazily on the wooden chair, raised her eyes slightly, and pointed at the group of gossipy people. "Tell them clearly, who is in charge of this business deal?" Young Master Li faced the crowd and stammered, It's profound heaven." "Very good, it seems that young Master Li is clear about his position." Hellion Vivian stood up and looked at Manager Zhang, who was beside her. "The business deal with the Li family will continue. But there is one thing, if today's situation happens again, put the Li family on the reject list. Tell them that profound heaven is like this, accepting business based on mood." "Yes." Manager Zhang lowered his eyes. Hellion Vivian's voice was faint. "Well, since it's all settled, you can go back to work. My friends and I will go in first. The auction is about to start. Make sure to clear the place. Those who don't like profound heaven, get rid of them." "Yes." Manager Zhang began to command the guards. Hellion Jiaoer and Madame Su couldn't believe that things would develop in this direction. Not only did Eunuch Sun not take away Hellion Vivian, that little bitch, but it was Lord Li who personally apologized to her. It was not like his usual self. At that moment, Madame Su even felt that the person who slapped himself in front of Hellion Vivian was not Lord Li, but her. Hellion Jiaoer was so angry that she clenched the white handkerchief in her hand. The fall in her heart was indescribable. Originally, she was the one who was in the limelight today, and it was easy for her to enter profound heaven. Besides, she couldn't think of anyone else who could win those armaments. But now she was reduced to the point of being driven away. Chapter 224. Mother. Hellion Jiaoer was anxious. Not only were there madams from the capital here, but there were also students from the same academy as her. If she was really chased away like this, where would she put her face in the future? "Mother, we can't go. I don't believe that with my current status, I can't even get into a small auction house. I won't go." Hearing this, Hellion Vivian sneered. "Old Zhang, did you hear that?" "I heard." Manager Zhang's gaze was slightly cold as he looked at Hellion Jiaoer. He really admired this genius who was known as the capital's #1 beauty. When other people tried to chase her away, she still refused to leave. How thick was her skin? Hellion Vivian's eyes turned cold. "Then why haven't you beaten me yet?" Pung! The sound of the swift and fierce staff rang in the air. Everyone was suddenly shocked. Looking at the masked knights, they were shocked and frightened. That was a new mercenary group that recently rose up, had tailor-made martial arts that others didn't have. They came and went mysteriously, their whereabouts were a mystery, and their commission fee was frighteningly high. They didn't accept commissions easily. Could it be that even this mercenary group was Hellion Vivian's? Everyone's eyes shook, and they wanted to retreat in fear. Hellion Jiaoer refused to accept this and wanted to raise her martial chi, but Madame Su held her hand. "Jiaoer. Stop." "Mother, are you going to let this go?" Hellion Jiaoer sneered. "What mysterious mercenary group? Even if there were 10 of them working under that trash, they wouldn't be able to beat me." Madame Su saw that she couldn't persuade her and her tone became angry. She pointed her finger at her head. "How can you be as stupid as your third sister? Think about it, what will the world say about you if you fight? Just because someone didn't let you in, you shamelessly insisted on entering." "Mother." Hellion Jiaoer's eyes reddened as teardrops followed and fell down. However, she was full of hatred. "I really can't take this lying down." When Madame Su saw her beloved daughter like this, she felt her face burn even hotter and her heart hurt even more. However, she had to endure it and quickly dragged the Hellion Jiaoer forward. This was the first time that she had been chased out of the trading company in such a manner, and yet she had to endure it without any temper. This was all because of Hellion Vivian. That little bastard. Sooner or later, she would personally skin her alive. Who allowed you to leave? A cold voice sounded beside his ear. Before Su Yenmo could react, she saw a flash before her eyes. Hellion Vivian was already standing in front of her. She effortlessly stood in front of them, her long hair swaying slightly. Su Yenmo did not have an ounce of martial qi in her body. It was precisely because she did not have martial qi that she had set her sights on the Hellion bloodline before marrying into the defense division. Why was it that her daughter did not know anything, while that bitch's daughter was born a genius? She was not convinced, so she simply used that bitch's blood to refine pills and carefully raised her daughter. That was how Hellion Jiaoer achieved her current status. When Hellion Vivian stood in front of her, she actually felt that the bitch had come alive and was here to take her life. Su Yenmo could not help but shudder. Hellion Jiaoer shouted angrily, "Hellion Vivian, don't you go too far. You came to my territory and caused trouble, but you didn't even apologize. Who is the one who is going too far?" Hellion Vivian sneered. Hellion Jiaoer remembered her mother's instructions and endured. "Big sister, I never wanted to fight with you to this extent. Is that so?" Hellion Vivian curled her lips and said evilly, "That's not what you said just now." Hellion Jiaoer bit her lip tightly. "I didn't know better just now." "What did you say?" "Louder." Hellion Vivian reached out and dug her ears. Hellion Jiaoer clenched her hands tightly and took a deep breath. "I didn't know better just now. If you don't know any better, then let Madame Su teach you well. Don't always get used to snatching other people's things and think that everything in the world belongs to you." Hellion Weiwei said a few words. Su Yenmo's smile froze on her face. Looking at the gazes directed at them from all around, Su Yenmo could not bear to stay any longer. She pulled Hellion Jiaoer into the sedan chair. Those relatives who wanted to enter the auction by relying on Su Yenmo saw that Su Yenmo had left and quickly looked at Hellion Vivian. "I told you Weiwei is capable." "Yes, yes." Someone followed and looked at Hellion Vivian ingratiatingly. "Weiwei, your second aunt and I have never said anything about you." Hellion Vivian turned around with a smile. "You didn't say anything about me just now?" "Then look, your second aunt and I are already here, the location of the auction." That person continued to smile. Hellion Vivian looked up and said slowly, "But you seem to have forgotten that you joined forces to banish me from the clan." That person's face turned pale. Then this matter. We were not willing to do that. After all, it was the 4 elders who made the decision. The woman standing at the side tried her best to explain. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "You were not willing? If you were not willing, would you have mocked me when I was out of the clan?" The 2 madams still wanted to say something. Hellion Vivian did not waste any more time and said coldly, "Make them leave." "Yes." Steward Zhang reached out and stopped them. The 2 madams looked like they were struck by lightning. Their expressions were stiff as they were blocked outside the door. Their faces showed deep resentment and jealousy because they could not get what they wanted. Eunuch Sun followed beside Hellion Vivian and said politely with a smile, "Miss, this old servant is here to pass a message to the retired emperor. It is not convenient for him to appear, so he sent this old servant. I hope you don't mind." "Eunuch Sun, what are you saying?" Hellion Vivian smiled and returned to her usual politeness. "I know what Eunuch Sun wants to say. I will trouble Eunuch Sun to pass the message. As long as there is a lot of money, Profound Heavens will do well for the retired emperor's martial practice." The horsetail whisk in Eunuch Sun's hand sank. "Then this old servant will take his leave. I wish Miss a perfect ending to this auction." "Thank you for your auspicious words." Hellion Vivian smiled and ordered the servant beside her. "Send Eunuch Sun out." "Yes." After Eunuch Sun left, Chunyi Feng then said with a worried face, "Boss, today's matter is satisfying, but you may not have a smooth journey in the future. Those people from the general's residence will definitely not let you go so easily. Today Eunuch Sun was here, so they didn't make a move. When you make the retired emperor's martial arts, they won't be so afraid. After all, you don't have a backer, and there are also the Li family and the Wu family. They are all from the 4 great families. If you offend them, I'm afraid it will be very difficult for you to walk in the capital in the future. I'm afraid something will happen. How about I stay by your side to protect you these few days?" Chapter 225. No need. Hellion Wei Wei moved her wrist and casually smiled. I can handle it myself. Don't worry, the auction is about to start. You guys can go to the seats that I have reserved and sit down. I still have some things to take care of. Chen Yifeng still felt uneasy, but Steward Zhang had already politely led them to another place. In the tea house, Eunuch Sun reported Hellion Vivian's words to the retired emperor. The retired emperor sat back in his seat and looked at the trembling official Li. He was not in the mood to watch the auction anymore. He just waved his hand and left the rest to Beligaju. Then, he returned to the palace with his guards. Official Li breathed a sigh of relief. He thought that since the retired emperor did not ask about it today, this matter would be over. However, he had forgotten that if it was His Highness who took action, there would only be two situations. The first was that His Highness was completely uninterested. In that case, he would have to congratulate Lord Li's ancestors for being able to live in peace. The second situation was that His Highness was very interested. In that case, he would still have to congratulate Lord Li, because there really weren't many things that His Highness was interested in. In the end, he would send people directly to accompany their ancestors. Sure enough, as soon as Eunuch Sun thought about it, Beligaju's cold and noble voice sounded. Take off your hair plume and clean it up. Don't get blood everywhere. It's very dirty. Yes. Aning was like a ghost. Official Li and his son did not even have a chance to speak before they were dragged out of the tea house. The rest of the officials saw this and their scalps went numb. They immediately restrained their hands and feet. Beligaju just sat on the main seat and looked up. There's also the Wu family. The Wu family. Some people were puzzled and whispered. The Wu family did not even say anything. How did they offend the royal family? Beligaju chuckled coldly. How did he break his leg? I think you all know better than I do. He didn't know how to be honest in the barracks. After leaving the barracks, he still wants to take in concubines. Since he is so easy to make mistakes on this issue, then let him know his place. Cut off that thing of his and throw him into the dungeon. Eunuch Sun was speechless. He thought that the marriage proposal was over, but it turned out that His Highness was waiting here. The others also felt that this matter was a bit strange. In the past, when the retired emperor came, he never asked anyone to accompany him. It was only this year that the Murong family, the Yuan family, and their subordinates, the Li family and the Wu family all received the order to accompany them at the last minute. Now that he thought about it, he had a feeling that they had set up a trap long ago and were just waiting for them to fall into it. However, the retired emperor shouldn't have used this kind of method. If he wanted to take someone under normal circumstances, he would directly take that person with a knife. Why would he use such a silent and incomparably sinister method? Who was the mastermind behind this? The remaining Murong Changfeng and the Yuan family's young master were all puzzled. They only felt a wave of uneasiness in their hearts. And Beligaju only held his teacup from beginning to end. His slender fingers supported his chin, looking indifferent and noble. Eunuch Sun glanced at his master again. Speaking of which, the people who had fallen into the water, this time seemed to be the people who had ridiculed eldest miss at White Academy. No, it couldn't be. Could it be that His Highness was angry because of a beauty? Eunuch Sun choked on his own thoughts and kept coughing at the side. This word really didn't suit His Highness. Moreover, wasn't this anger a bit too late? Eunuch Sun's face was full of doubt as he stared at Beligaju without blinking. Beligaju raised his eyebrows and said in a light tone, If you want to cut the weeds and dig up the roots, of course you need time. Eunuch Sun really was angry because of a beauty? Then His Highness and eldest miss. Not waiting for him to open his mouth, Bailey Jiaju already stood up, narrowed his pair of peach blossom eyes, the bottom of his eyes flashing as he walked to a dark corner, and ordered Shadow, go check which seat she's sitting in. Yes. Shadow's figure flashed and entered the auction house. Night slowly descended. The auction officially began. However, the He family's second young master, who planned to have a date with Mei Mei, was stunned when he saw the person next to him. Why is it you? Why can't it be me? Hellion Vivian shook the wine cup in her hand and laughed lightly. And this is really a good place. It's really suitable for two people to talk about love. Heizei wrinkled his thick eyebrows and felt that there was a problem that needed to be explained. That, Wei Wei, listen to me. Although I admire you, I don't have that kind of feeling towards you. Hellion Vivian's smile froze, as if she was greatly hurt. Then why did you say that you want to marry me into the Hay family? That's because. Heizei grabbed his long hair and suddenly had a kind of remorse of eating his own bitter fruit. He finally managed to crawl out from under the old man's nose today, just to spend some time with that stupid woman who didn't get it. How did he end up meeting Wei Wei? Also, she shouldn't have taken a fancy to him before, right? How come today? Could it be that the hint he gave before was really too obvious? Heizei's heart was full of regret, but he was afraid that directly saying it would hurt Hellion Vivian's face. After scratching for a long time, he still couldn't come up with a reason. Hellion Vivian simply used her trump card. She buried her head to one side and her voice trembled slightly. It sounded like she was crying. So you've been lying to me all this time. What a waste of my sincerity towards you. Heizei was stupefied. He'd known Hellion Vivian for so long and had only seen her valiant and handsome. When had he ever seen her cry? Heizei sat down dispiritedly. His fingers stroked Hellion Vivian's hair. I'm a scoundrel. He originally wanted to confess and be lenient. Who knew that this scene in the eyes of the people who became two lovers who had just finished quarreling and were about to reconcile and warm. Eunuch Sun's heart thumped loudly and subconsciously turned his head. Beligaju's silver mask looked colder than ever before. He faintly wrinkled his willowy eyebrows. His 10 ivory-like fingers tightly clasped the bag of armament parts that he just brought over to give to Hellion Vivian. His beautiful and sharp white teeth were slightly exposed. No matter how he tried, it couldn't conceal that heaven-destroying and earth-exterminating coldness. At this moment, the aura around his body was no longer indifferent. Instead, it contained a hidden chill. Even his smile was so cold that it made people's whole body tremble. Separated by the noisy crowd, Beligaju looked at the prey that should have been his, telling the truth to another man. It was just that one sentence that made Beligaju's chest tremble. It spread to him and even he couldn't understand it. His martial chi is going to disappear again. So what? Perhaps, after his prey and her beloved reconcile, she won't think about the contract between them anymore. Then she'll think about how to tell him about this matter, and then run away like last time. This series of conjectures reminded Beligaju again and again the prey he had set his eyes on didn't belong to him. Chapter 226. That's right, she didn't like him. And had even said bluntly that even after marriage, she wouldn't care if he found someone else. That was all because she had he eyes in her heart. If he let go, not long after, maybe Old Man Hay would agree to them being together, and then in a fulfilling and happy life, she would gradually forget him as her master. Of course, he could also choose to completely lock her up before she privately pledged her life to another man. Beligaju had always been calm and graceful, but at this moment he had lost all reason. Bang! Only the crisp sound of a chair being slammed could be heard. Beligaju had already walked behind Hei's with large strides, and pulled Hellion Vivian behind him, almost unable to control himself from revealing his true face in front of the world. Hellion Vivian was just about to ask Hei's, "Why are you pulling me?" when she heard Hei's say in astonishment, "Royal?" Hellion Vivian hurriedly raised her head, and only then did she see who was pulling her. Beligaju's pitch-black eyes were currently looking at Hei's with frosty eyes, and the person he was looking at was one of the few people in the world who wouldn't be afraid of him. Hei's raised his eyebrows, and his smile was quite thick. "Your Highness also heard that our shop is going to hold an auction, and specially came to support us? Hei's, you go back first, I want to talk to Royal alone again." Hellion Vivian wanted to send him away. After all, Royal had mentioned before that they didn't want to see her and Hei's involved, and she had violated this contract. Yet at this moment, Hei suddenly realized something, and his finger pointed at Hellion Vivian. "You didn't cry, you were just playing with me." Beligaju listened to the two people bickering, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became even colder. Without giving Hellion Vivian a chance to reply, he directly imprisoned her in his arms, and pulled her to a private room at the side. All the armaments in the auction house seemed to have been shaken by something, and all of them emitted a faint white light. What's going on? People looked at the armaments they were carrying with them in bewilderment. At this time, The Fire Kylan suddenly appeared beside Beligaju in an invisible state. Master, please calm down. If you can't control your current martial qi, all the blood vessels in your body will flow backwards. Your memory and soul are not complete yet. If this continues, your form will appear. Roar. The spirit beast beside an unknown person let out a low roar, as if it had sensed an unprecedented danger. It immediately revealed its form in the auction house and began to charge around violently. When the Fire Qilin saw that it was in trouble, it hurriedly flew over and glared at the spirit beast. When it turned its head back, it was shocked. The wooden door of the private room was already cracked by Beligaju's martial qi. Hellion Vivian instinctively felt that something was wrong and wanted to push him away. Seeing this, the coldness on Beligaju's face grew thicker and thicker. Caught off guard, he couldn't control the strength of his palm and threw Hellion Vivian onto the soft couch. Clang! A loud sound echoed. Hellion Vivian only felt dizzy and her back was unbearably painful. She arched her body and glared at him like a knife. Beligaju, are you crazy? Beligaju didn't speak. He didn't even move. He only stood elegantly in the dark and narrowed his cold eyes. The few spirit beasts outside seemed to have received some kind of heavy punishment. Each of them hugged their own heads and rolled back and forth on the ground, causing an uproar. When Hellion Vivian propped herself up, she vomited a mouthful of blood. Beligaju looked at her and suddenly froze. He admitted that he had always been a cruel and ruthless person, but this time he actually hated the power he was born with. He didn't want to hurt her. However, when his martial qi surged, his mind seemed to surge with many memories that didn't belong to him. Those elders in wanton robes called him monster. His thoughts couldn't calm down no matter how hard he tried. It was as if they had noticed the danger that came from his body. Hellion Vivian frowned. Just as she reached out her hand, it was cut by the surging martial qi. She raised her eyes and looked at Beligaju's left shoulder with a surprised expression. A trace of astonishment flashed through her eyes. Don't look at me like I'm a monster. Beligaju's fingers suddenly exerted force. Crack! A heavy crack appeared on one of the wooden beams above his head. Hellion Vivian jumped up. Without saying anything, she directly reached out her hands and hugged the man with the arrogant back. Together with him, the two of them rolled to a safe position. The surrounding martial qi disappeared in an instant. Everything returned to normal. Only a layer of the beam was broken and it didn't fall down. The spirit beasts also seemed to have been comforted. Their bodies shrunk and they licked their claws, as if they didn't know what had just happened. Beligaju looked at the small face that was close at hand. Her warm and gentle breath filled his nose. Hellion Vivian's breath was slightly chaotic as she opened her mouth. What's going on? Do you want to destroy my martial arts practice? Then you should pay attention to protecting yourself, Your Highness. Beligaju's eyes were slightly dazed. He suddenly smiled and reached out his hand to gently stroke Hellion Vivian's face. Such a delicate touch, such an intoxicating temperature. This is the prey that he had set his eyes on. Every time it happened, it would surprise everyone. Protection? Although this word sounded a bit overconfident. However, it didn't matter. He liked it very much. It's just that. This alone wasn't enough. Hellion Vivian looked at his eyes and sighed. The reason why I met with Heize today was because this martial arts practice firm was opened by him and me together. I forgot to tell you. You won't mind, right? You shook off the shadows these past few days just so you could meet with him alone. You opened a shop, but you never thought of telling me. Beligaju coldly asked. Is it because in your heart you don't want to let me know? Hellion Vivian, how much have you hidden from me? Or do you think that I'm not worthy of your trust and you're leaving yourself a way out? Hellion Vivian heard this and felt a little guilty. She didn't think too clearly, but in her heart, she really did want to keep a distance from Beligaju, because she felt that it wasn't good for the two of them to be involved too much. Now that Beligaju had hit the nail on the head, she didn't have anything to hide. That's right, I'm indeed leaving myself a way out. Beligaju looked at the hand that was protecting him. He only faintly grunted and said, I know. Then he returned to his usual expressionless face. Hellion Vivian thought that the royal was more intelligent and easier to communicate with. As long as she said it, he would accept everything gracefully and indifferently. However, what Hellion Vivian didn't know was that just as she was smiling lightly at Beligaju made a decision. He was going to cut off all her escape routes. Then she would only belong to him. Chapter 227. When Fire Qilin pushed open the door, it saw this scene. Couldn't believe it. Apart from it, who else would dare to be so close to its master when he was furious? It was stunned for a moment before it silently closed the door again. Then it hid its form and stood guard outside the door. Hellion Vivian put her palms on the ground and tried to stand up. But Beligaju pressed her back down and said in a faint voice, "If you get up like this, what about me?" Hellion Vivian didn't understand what His Highness meant and raised her eyebrows. Beligaju pointed at his arm with his slender fingers. Hellion Vivian realized that when she was rolling just now, she was too reckless and hurt His Highness. Bandage it. Hellion Wei felt that the most she had ever seen His Highness doing was bandaging His Highness' wounds. However, raise your finger. Hellion Wei listened to the indifferent instructions by her ear. She really didn't understand. How did it become a certain highness helping her bandage when she merely cut her finger? But how long would it take the royal family to tie this bow knot? Outside, the auction of armaments has already started. The time it took for a stick of incense to burn had already passed, but the third prince was still frowning and fighting with the silk cloth. His scholarly aura leaked out without a doubt. Hellion Vivian wanted to say, "Put it down and let me do it," but she was afraid that if she was too direct, the royal family would think that she was mocking his intelligence. No, she was the one who was usually mocked for her intelligence. Finally, the royal family made a bow knot that wasn't too ugly. His thin lips slightly pursed. "Do you usually use this kind of silk cloth to bandage my wound? It's not very convenient." Hellion Vivian. "Trust me, it has nothing to do with the silk cloth. It's all your fault." "Has His Highness never bandaged anyone's wound before?" "Yes." "Then when you get injured while practicing martial arts, do other people bandage for you?" "No, it's fine if I'm injured." Hellion Vivian listened to His Highness's indifferent tone, and almost instantly, a cold and handsome little prince appeared in front of her. He let the blood flow from his forehead, but he didn't even blink. His eyes were calm and long, and he walked his own path. There was no one beside him, but he was so strong that he could almost hold up the entire sky. Was he lonely? He must be. Because he was born in the royal family, he was destined to be calculative and vigilant since he was young, which made him seem out of place in this world. He was a bit like young Master Tang, stand up and walk 2 laps. Bailey Jiaju said faintly. Hellion Wei uttered an "oh" and really walked 2 laps. Bailey Jiaju put down the silk cloth in his hand and said, "It seems that you didn't become stupid." Hellion Wei was about to retort. She heard Bailey Jiaju faintly say, "I'm sorry." For a moment Hellion Vivian thought she heard wrong. She turned her face and saw that he was holding her left hand. She couldn't see the side of his face, only a faint outline. Some people look cold on the surface, but in fact they are soft inside. "That's you, His Highness." Hellion Vivian smiled. At this time the first bell rang outside the door. It seemed that the panic just now didn't affect the normal auction of the martial arts. This was all thanks to Heize's innate decision-making and management ability, and Profound Heaven's well-trained hands and feet. Although people were puzzled, they still put all of their attention on the martial arts that was about to appear. In the midst of the silver light, a folding fan with 100% lethality was born. Chunifeng gasped. He couldn't believe what he saw. A martial arts could actually be so exquisite. It must be very cool to hold in one's hand. Heize also liked that martial arts very much and wanted to give it to a woman who didn't understand. Now he regretted that the old man locked him up and didn't let him see this martial arts before the auction. But it didn't matter. In any case, when the time came to auction, he would get half of the price. 500,000 taels, start now. The small hammer in the manager's hand fell. Someone immediately stretched out his hand. Good, this guest bid 50 taels. Are there any higher bids? 510,000 taels. 52 taels, are there any more? 600,000 taels. 700,000 taels. Until Heize called out 700,000 taels, no one continued to bid. Although that martial arts was good, one still had to consider the price. The martial arts that young Master Wu Shuang personally made were at most 1,000,000 taels. 700,000 taels going once. 700,000 taels going twice. 1,000,000 taels. Beligaju slowly walked out. His pair of eyes habitually half-squinted, faintly glowing. 1,000,000 taels. Everyone sucked in a deep breath. That was enough to buy a big house. This martial arts was worth so much money? When Heizei saw that the bidder was Beligaju, his eyebrows slightly raised. Was he planning to fight with him? 1,100,000 taels. Heizei raised his eyes and met Beligaju's line of sight. Beligaju brushed his sleeves. 2,000,000 taels. Heizei instantly felt all of his blood rush to his head. I bid 3,000,000 taels. Beligaju raised his eyebrows and sized Heizei up a few times. Sure enough, he didn't make another sound. The manager started to bid. 3,000,000 taels going once. Heizei stared at Beligaju, but Beligaju didn't even move an inch. The manager continued. 3,000,000 taels going twice. Hellion Vivian instantly wrinkled her eyebrows. This man shouldn't have been deliberately bidding from the start, right? Heizei was actually dizzy from the hard-won joy. He turned his head and proudly smiled at Hellion Vivian, as if saying, how is it? Big brother was awesome, right? I even got rid of the royal family. Beligaju looked at him and suddenly said indifferently, did you bring money? Heizei was instantly petrified in place. Beligaju continued to speak unhurriedly. It is said that old man He cut off your money. What are you going to use to pay for this auction? Heizei finally reacted. He was tricked by His Highness. Profound Heavens never accepted credit, even if it was him. What should he do? 300 taels going thrice sold. Damn it. Heizei fiercely cursed. No matter how unwilling he was, he still had to brace himself and go up. Hellion Wei Wei silently looked at her good friend's collapsed handsome face and let out a long sigh. It was simply a complete defeat, a complete defeat. There was no other way. Heizei could only brace himself and find Nailan Hongya, and let the woman spend money to buy an armament for him. This was the first time he used a woman's money to buy something under the watchful eyes of so many people. His Highness simply didn't have good intentions. But for the next 4 armaments, Beligaju actually paid the highest price to buy them all, and gave them to Hellion Vivian. This made Heizei even more certain that His Highness deliberately tricked him just now. Only why did he do this? Could it be because of Wei Wei? Chapter 228. 5 armaments, each sold for a sky-high price that exceeded people's imagination. Everyone said that this time Profound Heavens made a fortune. Hellion Vivian made a fortune. In this way, Profound Heavens, with its special marketing methods, successfully obtained the same treatment as a century-old shop. Just the flow of that day's seat fee alone exceeded 5,000,000 taels of silver. All the stewards counted the money until their hands went limp. Hellion Vivian smiled and drank a mouthful of tea, as if everything was within her expectations. But there was one point. Why did a certain highness give her all these armaments? Hellion Vivian glanced sideways and looked at the man sitting beside her. As if knowing what she was thinking, Beligaju faintly met her gaze and said in a cold tone, betrothal gift. Betrothal gift? Betrothal gift? Hellion Vivian was slightly surprised. She really didn't think that she could get a betrothal gift. However, who would give armaments as a betrothal gift? What was the difference between this and a modern-day bridegroom giving a gun to the bride? Was the etiquette of the royal family so strange? Ahem, this is a bit strange as a betrothal gift. Hellion Vivian thought for a moment. On the day of the wedding, everyone else was wearing gold and silver. Only she was carrying 2 armaments in one hand. People who didn't know would think that she was looking for the royal family to fight. Embarrassing. Beligaju's long eyebrows slightly wrinkled. His voice was very slow and somewhat indifferent. Is it strange? Not really, the main thing is why you want to give me a betrothal gift. Hellion Vivian didn't finish her words. Beligaju elegantly interrupted her. I know. Hellion Vivian was very satisfied. Communicating with smart people was so convenient. She reckoned that the royal family also realized that there was no need for any betrothal gift between them. Anyway, the wedding was just a formality. In 2 days I will give you something else. Beligaju casually threw one of the armaments on the wooden table. It was as if he was saying that he would give her one tael of silver tomorrow. Something else. Hellion Vivian silently took back her words. His Highness must not be living in the same dimension as her. As for the invisible fire Qilin, it stood at the side and frowned in worry. Its master's meridians were all in chaos. It was afraid that it would have to disappear for a few more days to allow its master to recover by himself. However, during this period of time, the underlings of the 4 great clans were particularly powerful. Master! The fire Qilin's steady voice resounded in the fantasy space. What should we do next? Beligaju communicated with him using the stream of consciousness. Send all the secret guards to the Phoenix Tower. Leave a few people to guard the retired emperor. Yes. The fire Qilin lowered its eyes. For the first time it felt worried. According to the past, its master's eyes would go blind the next morning. It hoped that nothing bad would happen then at night, in the protector's manner. Hellion Jiaoer was so jealous that her expression changed. She didn't know the relationship between Hellion Vivian and Beligaju, because they hadn't announced it yet. However, she had only heard that her sweetheart had actually bought 4 armaments from that bitch in one go. Hellion Jiaoer's heart seemed to be blocked by something. In addition to the matter that made her lose face today, right now, she simply couldn't wait to immediately tear Wei Wei into pieces. Mother, are you really going to let this bitch torment you like this? Hellion Jiaoer sat in front of Su Yanmo with red eyes. She even dares to have designs on the royal family now. Who knows when she will climb over our heads? Su Yanmo listened and a trace of malice flashed in her eyes. I used to think that she was immature. I didn't expect that this girl's thoughts were so big. Jiaoer, don't worry. The position of the princess consort can only be yours. As for that little bastard, I have my ways. Mother, you've thought of a good idea. Hellion Jiaoer's eyes lit up. Su Yanmo held the teacup in her hand and said in a sinister voice, since she has thoughts that she shouldn't have, then don't blame me for being ruthless. Even if she was chased out of the general's residence, I'm still her mother in name. Marriage is decided by the parents and the matchmaker. Mother has the final say on who she wants to marry. Mother, you're thinking of... Hellion Jiaoer couldn't help but stand up from the chair, her face brighter than before. Su Yanmo patted her hand. There are still 2 days before the martial qi competition. Although it's a little rushed, it's enough to pick a suitable man for that little bastard. Mother, where do you have anyone on hand? Hellion Jiaoer bit her thin lips, afraid that it wouldn't be possible. Besides, no one is willing to marry that ugly woman. Su Yanmo smiled. Silly girl, that was in the past. Now that she's rich, there are plenty of people who want her money. Hellion Jiaoer was stunned, then threw herself into Su Yanmo's arms. Mother, you have a way. That young Master Huainan that someone introduced to your third sister last time is not bad. Su Yanmo was calculating in her heart. That person is handsome and has a way with this kind of ugly woman. I'll go to the Hui family later to write an invitation. Hellion Jiaoer snorted. Mother, last time you said that young Master Huainan was unreliable. Other than his face, he only knows how to eat, drink, and play. He relies on women all day long. Don't look at how he's relying on his family's money now. If someone really marries him in the future, there won't be a corpse left. You told third sister not to interact with him to avoid ruining her reputation. Why is it that when it comes to that little bitch, your words are different? Su Yanmo knocked her head. The corner of her mouth became more sinister. If I don't say that, others will think that I'm mistreating that little bastard. The better I praise that young Master Huainan, the easier this matter will be. Don't worry, other than Mother, no one knows what kind of person that young Master Huainan is. Mother, you really dug a good hole. Hellion Jiaoer's eyes flashed with malice. Let's see what you, Hellion Vivian, will do now. The next day, White Academy. A cool breeze blew gently. At a corner of the inferior compound, Hellion Vivian was making the final adjustments to her umbrella, thinking that it would come in handy during the martial qi competition. Yuan Ming was lazily floating on the branches of a tree, basking in the sun. Of course, he was in stealth mode. The sun was just right. Hellion Vivian had just finished adjusting her umbrella and was about to stretch when she saw a slender and elegant figure above her head. That figure was dressed differently from usual. His eyes were covered with a piece of white cloth. His face was so perfect that it made the morning sun behind him a little pale. Hellion Vivian stopped her movements and frowned at him. What happened to your eyes? Beligaju avoided the sound and leaned over to her side, his voice lazy. I've been poisoned. Poisoning can hurt the eyes? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Beligaju made a sound of acknowledgement and then smiled devilishly. So, I'll have to trouble my patron to take care of me in the future. Chapter 229. Every time Hellion Vivian heard the title of patron, the corner of her mouth would twitch. She didn't beat around the bush and very righteously said, if you need any help in the future, just tell me. Okay. Beligaju's thin lips curved. It was unknown what he thought of, but his face was full of bewitchment. Oh right. Hellion Vivian put down the umbrella and said, where did you go yesterday? I looked for you for a long time, wanting you to go with me to see the armament auction. Bailey Jiaju paused and unhurriedly asked in reply. Armament auction? What armament auction? Shadow, who was standing beside him, coughed heavily twice. Your Highness, that's enough. It's clearly the armament auction that you participated in yesterday. Did you forget? You even got a pile of armaments as betrothal gifts for the Princess Consort, but the Princess Consort disdained them. Beligaju faintly glanced at him. Shadow immediately straightened his body, expressionless. Hellion Vivian looked at the master and servant strangely. Didn't you hear that Profound Heavens is holding an auction? I've been at home recently. Beligaju's words were true. These 2 days, he was indeed in the palace, thinking of ways to break the claws of those who looked down on his prey one by one. But this would obviously lead to ambiguous thoughts when listening to it. He was really two-faced. Hellion Vivian also didn't dwell on this issue. She only said that if there was a chance in the future, she would bring Beligaju over. Beligaju quietly listened. Just as he was about to send Shadow away, he heard a voice in the distance announcing the good news. Congratulations, Miss Weiwei. Congratulations, Miss Weiwei. Congratulations? Hellion Vivian turned around and saw a woman dressed as a matchmaker standing at the entrance of the academy. She was well dressed and had a dangling hairpin on her head. When she saw Hellion Vivian, she jogged towards her. Miss Hellion Vivian, good news, good news, good news. Hellion Weiwei knew that woman. She was the famous matchmaker in the capital. As long as you had money, this matchmaker would do anything for you no matter what. Through her hands, many young girls had been ruined. For example, she tricked the parents of those girls into marrying their daughters to an old man who was over 60 years old and so on. When she and Murong Changfeng had an engagement, she would often come to the Defense Division manor. On the surface it was to persuade her, but in reality, she wanted her to give up on this engagement as soon as possible. At that time, Murong Prince Manor actually opened up quite a few conditions through her mouth. This lackey, why did she come to White Academy today? How come I don't know what good news I have? Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. A shrewd coldness flashed through her eyes. Matchmaker Zhang didn't know that the current Hellion Vivian had changed. She only thought that she was calmer than before, and no longer had that kind of stupid temperament. She smiled and said, this is a good news, ah. I just received the news, how would Miss Weiwei know? But it doesn't matter. Today, I specially came to tell Miss Weiwei the good news. In a while, the main character will arrive. Hearing that, Hellion Vivian sneered. There's no need for the main character to arrive. Your arrival has already made me sick. I don't want to do anything today. You better go back to where you came from. Miss Weiwei, look at what you're saying. That matchmaker was worthy of being called a black-hearted person. Even after being told off like that by Hellion Vivian, she could still smile without any change in her expression. Only the corners of her mouth stiffened for a moment, then warmed up again. I know Miss Weiwei is blaming me for speaking nonsense in front of you before, but I'm also sincerely thinking for your good. Murong Prince Manor's entrance is too difficult to enter. What if Miss Weiwei enters and gets bullied? See, Miss Weiwei's fate has followed along. The Huayan family in the capital that makes silk and satins, their ancestors are also officials. Their status and position are all compatible with Miss Weiwei. The key is that this Master Huayan is very attentive to Miss Weiwei. He has already inquired about you many times from this old woman. His appearance is also very handsome, that kind of elegant gentleman's appearance in the entire capital. He can be ranked as one of the top. Yet, he is interested in you. Tell me, isn't this a good news? Hearing that, before Hellion Vivian could open her mouth, Aning was completely stunned. This person, was she here to propose marriage for the future princess? He paused, raised his eyes and looked at Bailey Jiaju, only to see that his master's handsome face didn't have any expression, especially after the gauze covered his eyes. The only thing that Shadow could see was his cold, thin lips. Hellion Vivian raised the corner of her eyes, the light in her eyes slightly cold. This Master Huayan that you're talking about, I've never heard of him. How can you say it's a good news? Grandma Zhang exclaimed. Miss Wei Wei, don't be anxious. Master Huayan will be here soon. Hearing the other side deliberately distorting her words, and even shouting loudly, she simply wanted to make the whole White Academy know. Hellion Vivian looked at her, suddenly sneered, and lifted her foot to kick that Grandma Zhang's body. Grandma Zhang did not expect that Hellion Vivian would be so ruthless. Her forehead heavily knocked on the tree, and she could only hold her stomach and wail in pain. Hellion Vivian pinched her chin and said fiercely, if I hear you say one more word, I will cut off that tongue of yours that likes to spread rumors, and feed it to the dogs. Grandma Zhang was completely frightened by the coldness in Hellion Vivian's eyes. How could she have that kind of gaze, as if she wanted to kill her? Grandma Zhang's heart was greatly shocked, and her whole body was unusually cold. Her whole body seemed to have suddenly fallen into an ice cave, and she did not dare to say anything more. She even regretted accepting this business deal at this time. A person walked over from afar, dressed in brocade and satin, holding a folding fan in his hand, fair and clean, with a somewhat elegant appearance. Seeing old lady Zhang lying on the ground, that pair of eyes looked at Hellion Wei Wei again, with gentleness like water. Miss Wei Wei, you're still the same as when I first saw you, straightforward and lawless. But don't blame old lady Zhang, I was too anxious, so I asked her to speak on my behalf. I'm afraid Miss Wei Wei has already forgotten about me. After all, at that time, you only had Lord Murong in your heart. After that, that person seemed to be hurt and sighed deeply. At this time there were many students surrounding them. Looking at this scene, there was no one who was not moved by this man's words. After all, whether it was Hellion Vivian or these students, they were only in their teens, the first awakening of love, and there were always some fantasies about the love mentioned in the book. In addition, in ancient times, there were not many who dared to speak frankly about love, so the other party only said a few words, and poked their young girl heart. That man looked at the surrounding people who were looking at him, and knew that his words had an effect. He was the best at dealing with these girls, not to mention the love-struck Hellion Vivian. Chapter 230. This woman was the object of their collective ridicule. Every time she saw young Master Murong, she couldn't even take her eyes off him. Unfortunately, she had such a horrible appearance. If he didn't know that she was now rich and had become the boss of Profound Heaven, he wouldn't even want to look at her ugly face. Presumably, after hearing what he said, she would definitely be overjoyed and agree to this marriage. His trick had deceived a lot of people. Even the real third miss of the general's residence had been hooked up by him, not to mention the leftover woman who had been driven out. Thinking of this, the man's smile became even wider. Yet he didn't know that within Wei Wei's youthful appearance, there wasn't a hazy young girl, but rather a queen of arms who specialized in dealing with all kinds of big venues. Huayan's trick of seducing people was simply not enough for Hellion Vivian. Since you know that I don't even recognize you, then why don't you hurry up and get lost? Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes, like a cat that was about to stretch out its claws. Huayan's face stiffened. He didn't expect to get such an answer. This was simply like slapping his face in front of everyone. Since this trick of being gentle like water didn't work, Huayan simply sneered, "You want me to get lost? The general's residence has already accepted my betrothal gift, and now you want me to get lost? Where is the matchmaker's word in the world?" Everyone looked at each other. According to reason, once the betrothal gift was accepted, it meant that she agreed and had to marry. Otherwise, she would be reprimanded by the world. Hellion Vivian originally didn't care about this kind of thing, but when she thought of the royal family once said something to her about reputation, she could only restrain her temper and didn't wave her fist at Huayan's face. Carefully thinking about it, this marriage proposal came too suddenly. She had just announced her identity, and there was this kind of shameless man who came up and said that he had already given her betrothal gift. No matter how she looked at it, there was someone who deliberately wanted to marry her off. As for this young Master Huayan in front of her, she reckoned that he was a scumbag with a golden exterior and rotten interior. If she married over, not only would he not treat her well, he might have other ideas about her. And the person who arranged all this had already accepted the betrothal gift early, just so that she wouldn't have the chance to refuse. What a vicious mind. Hellion Vivian's gaze turned cold as she swept a glance at the accessories on young Master Huayan's waist. The corner of her mouth curled up. The betrothal gift you mentioned, I haven't even seen it. Go find whoever received it. You want to go back on your word? Huayan took a step forward. Now my betrothal gifts are still in the general's residence. Madame Su has already arranged them for you, waiting for you to get married. Wei, why are you so stubborn and unwilling to believe that I will treat you well? Huayan was smart and knew how to be firm first and then soft. This way it wouldn't sound too harsh in the ears of others. They would only think that Hellion Vivian used the betrothal gift and didn't admit it. It wouldn't be a big deal if he had only accepted her, but he had already arranged everything properly. It was equivalent to accepting this marriage. No matter what he said, it would be Hellion Vivian's fault. Hellion Vivian sneered. Since Mrs. Su is the one who received and arranged the gifts, why don't you marry her? Hellion Vivian, you... Huayan was so angry that he almost couldn't maintain his demeanor. Finally, he took a deep breath. How can you say such things? It's too disappointing. Hearing this, everyone also shook their heads. They thought that even if this Hellion Vivian was promising, she was also vicious. Her stepmother was so good to her, and even arranged her marriage for her. Not only did she not know how to be grateful, but she also didn't know what was good for her. At this time, Hellion Jiaoer and Hellion Mei also came. Hellion Jiaoer saw Grandma Zhang, who was kicked to the ground by Hellion Vivian, and exclaimed, "What's going on? Grandma Zhang, didn't you come to propose marriage for young Master Huayan? How did it become like this?" Miss Jiaoer. Old Madame Zhang looked as if she had just seen her family member. She wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and said, "What sins did I, Old Madame Zhang, commit in my previous life? I was kind enough to help, but I was beaten up. I've said so many things, but I've never seen anyone like this." Old Madame Zhang originally wanted to call her a little slut, but when she met Hellion Wei's eyes, her whole body shivered. She abruptly changed her words and called out, "Eldest Miss Hellion, it's so hard to talk to her." Hellion Jiaoer was like a fairy. She wiped old Madame Zhang's face with a handkerchief pitifully. Then she turned to Hellion Wei and said, "Eldest sister, old Madame Zhang has good intentions. How can you treat her like this? Mother has been looking for a marriage for you. It's fine if you don't care about it, but you also made everyone so embarrassed." Kind? Hellion Vivian's mouth hooked up. Kind enough to introduce a man who is flirting with third sister to me? What kind of thoughts does she have? If people don't know, they would think that I, Hellion Vivian, am a love-struck fool who wants to steal my sister's man. I'm not like you, unable to lay hands on my sister's man. Hellion Vivian's words slapped three people's faces at the same time. Everyone knew that Hellion Jiaoer didn't want to mention that she did have the intention to steal Hellion Vivian's marriage, but because of the royal family's consort selection, she immediately withdrew. The fishy nature of this matter couldn't stand up to scrutiny. And because Hellion Mei had a guilty conscience, she shouted loudly, "Who are you saying is hooking up with who? Hellion Vivian, I'm warning you, don't make slanderous accusations." Slanderous accusations? Hellion Vivian suddenly moved her feet and brushed past Huayan. She opened her left hand, and there was a well-made purse in her palm. "Third sister, your name is written on this. Why is it hanging on this man?" Hellion Mei's face changed. Even Hellion Jiaoer didn't know that there would be such a matter. Turning her head, she looked towards Hellion Mei and clenched her teeth. This person was unable to accomplish anything, but good at spoiling things. She actually made such a big mistake. An unmarried woman's purse was hanging on a man's body. This matter didn't need to be said. Everyone knew what was going on. They all looked at Hellion Mei, and Huayan's face didn't look good. And he reached out to take the purse in Hellion Vivian's hand. Unexpectedly, Helian Weiwei just shook her head and grabbed his arm. With a beautiful backswing, she threw Huayan to the ground. Then she handsomely pinched Huayan's throat with her fingers and said in a cold voice, "How dare you say that you like me and want to marry me? Do you really think that I, Helian Vivian, am a fool? It's obviously profitable. Tell me, who gave you the idea? And what about those betrothal gifts?" Chapter 231. Huayan gritted his teeth and didn't speak. Helian Vivian smiled coldly and put more strength into her hand. "You still don't want to talk?" Huayan endured the pain and denied, "I don't understand what you are talking about. Helian Vivian, why do you have to be so vicious? You always misinterpret others." Helian Vivian narrowed her eyes and didn't do anything. "Let me do it." Beligaju, who was standing on the side, opened his mouth with a faint smile on his thin lips. "How can you be so rude to a guest?" Helian Vivian paused and raised her eyebrows at Beligaju. "This brother is more reasonable." Huayan thought he was saved and was about to stand up. However, the man whose eyes were covered by the white cloth slowly took off the white gloves on his hands and directly grabbed his dislocated arm. Creak! It made things worse. It was more painful than dislocating a person's arm. Huayan was in so much pain that he was about to faint. Beligaju hit his acupoint so that he wouldn't faint even if he was in extreme pain. To put it simply, it made people feel this bone-piercing pain at all times. Then, he continued to pinch Huayan's other arm unhurriedly. He curved his thin lips in self-reproach and said in distress, "Oh, I seem to have grabbed the wrong arm. This one is good." Creak! As soon as his voice fell, Huayan's body stiffened. Huayan's entire body arched, and the cold sweat on his forehead instantly slid down. Does it hurt now?" Beligaju moved his fingers with a faint smile. When he lowered his eyes, Huayan almost had the illusion that he was looking at a demon. Even if he was so handsome that he was harmless, Huayan still wanted to escape. Yes, his first reaction was to run away. Fear was the only thought in his mind. However, he couldn't even move. A murderous voice rang in his ears, as if it was demanding his life. "Then you still dare to come and propose marriage?" Creak! Another crisp sound rang out. It was so loud and merciless that the people standing around trembled. Huayan cried, "What happened to not being rough? Which subordinate did you use as a betrothal gift?" Beligaju picked him up with one hand and looked at Huayan mockingly. The cloth was wrapped around his eyes, giving people a sense of sanctity. Huayan stammered left hand, "Oh." He watched as Beligaju lifted his foot and was about to step on his left hand. Huayan immediately changed his words. He curled up on the ground and begged for mercy. "No, I have never given any betrothal gifts. This was all Madame Su's idea." As he spoke, he retreated backwards. His face was covered in tears and snot, and he no longer had the flirtatious appearance from before. Helian Vivian frowned in disgust and reached out to grab his collar. "You'd better make it clear, otherwise, I'll say it." Huayan was afraid that Beligaju would lay hands on him again. He said with tears in his eyes, "It was Madame Su who found me. I didn't want to at first, but she said that as long as I married you, I could get half of Profound Heaven's industry. Then I was moved." Hearing this, everyone knew what was going on. They looked at Huayan with eyes full of shock. "Half of Profound Heaven's industry? You deserve it?" Helian Vivian sneered. "What's the matter with that purse?" Huayan glanced at Helian Mei. Helian Mei was anxious and wanted to walk over. Unfortunately, Shadow happened to be blocking in front of her. She could only hold on to her two arms, and like a shrew roared Helian Weiwei. Helian Vivian was unmoved. She coldly and arrogantly squeezed Huayan's arm and said, "Say it. I, Mayor, and I have privately pledged to be together for life, but Madame Su didn't agree, so Mayor gave her purse to me and asked me to wait for her." As soon as Huayan's words came out, Helian Mei only had one thought in her mind, and that was she was finished. In other words, Su Yenemo knows that you two have feelings for each other, but she asked you to propose marriage to me for Profound Heaven's industry in my hands? What a shameless method. Helian Vivian raised her foot and kicked Huayan away. As she spoke, she looked around at the students, and finally her eyes fell on Helian Jiaoer, who wanted to leave. "What's wrong, second sister?" You want to leave now that your trick has been exposed? Have you forgotten that you and your mother spent money to buy Granny Zhang? Helian Jiao Er's body stiffened. The deathly pale color on her face was inadvertently exposed. She only felt that she had lost face to the bone. Helian Vivian smiled and said in a faint voice, "Doesn't Madame Su like to accept betrothal gifts? Since she has accepted young Master Huayan's betrothal gift, she should give him a daughter. I think third sister is just right." Helian Vivian, you. Ever since her mother called her, Helian Mei had never thought of marrying Huayan. Marrying such a man was like pushing her into a fire pit. My marriage is not for you to decide. Helian Vivian's eyes turned cold. Third sister, why are you so unhappy? Could it be that there is something wrong with Huayan? Madame Su is so nice, she pushed away a man her own daughter doesn't want and said it was for my own good? Helian Jiaoer looked at the people around them who were pointing at them and pulled Helian Mei back. Shut up. Do you want mother's reputation to plummet? But I can't marry Huayan. Second sister, it has been a long time since the matter between me and Huayan. Helian Mei hurriedly grabbed Helian Jiaoer's hand. What's more, mother said that I can't marry into their family. This little bitch clearly did it on purpose. She deliberately forced me to agree, and let me marry into their family. Helian Jiaoer was also very angry, but there was nothing she could do. Agree first. Second sister. Helian Mei couldn't believe it. This is a big matter in my life. Otherwise, what do you want to do? If you ruin mother's reputation, you will also be kicked out of the academy. Think about it, the academy doesn't allow you to meet a man in private, let alone you don't want to marry? Who else can you marry? Helian Jiaoer shook off her hand. Will father keep a daughter who ruins his reputation at home? Helian Mei froze, and her face was blank as if she had lost all hope. She fell into the servant girl's arms in a daze. Helian Jiaoer also didn't want to make a fuss to this point. Just as she said this to Helian Mei, the fairy image she painstakingly maintained was greatly reduced. When Madame Su received the news, she was so angry that her whole body trembled. In fact, there was no betrothal gift. It was just a scheme she came up with to push Helian Vivian into the fire pit. In the end, not only did she not succeed, but she also had to give away a daughter for free. That was the old lady she had doted on since childhood. Although she couldn't compare to Jiao Er, she was still Madame Su's favorite. Chapter 232. She was the apple of her eye since she was young. Although she was not as good as Jiao Er, she was also Madame Su's favorite. This cut was already painful to the point of anger. Good, what a little bitch. Madame Su's eyes were murderous, listening to Helian Mei's crying. Her heart was even more angry and painful. If it wasn't for the fact that they were in the White Academy, she could still deny it. However, so many people were listening. If she did not marry her mother over, she would be pointed at behind her back and scolded to death by the people in the capital. There was no other way. Madame Su could only try to comfort Helian Mei and help her with the dowry. However, how could Madame Su take this lying down? She carefully raised these two girls, which one of them was not the best in the capital. In the future, at least they could marry into a noble family, but now they were only concubines of a businessman. The Huai family looked good on the surface, but in fact they had lost all their money, and when they married they had to subsidize them from time to time. Su Yanmo's heart hurt more than if someone killed her. It made her feel worse. You. Go write a letter to the Prime Minister. Su Yanmo sneered. That brat Helian Wei won't be able to use it. Jiao Er's blood is enough and the fusion rate is also very good. If we keep that bastard, it will only become a disaster. Yes. The woman dressed as a mammy retreated. Su Yanmo looked at the teacup in her hand and used a lot of force. Little bastard, your death date is coming soon. Those people, they are all gold peak. At dusk, Yuan Xiaoming chewed on the grass in his mouth and said casually, Woman, your method is really ruthless, killing without blood. The pain they added to my body, how can it be exchanged with a simple death? Wei Wei put down the armament in her hand. Don't forget, the reason why I was able to raise you was precisely because of this heart of poison. Yuan Xiaoming smiled evilly. Then what are you going to do next? Now it's almost time to start to seize power, right? After the martial qi test, the people in the family will choose a new family head. Helian Vivian twirled the silver in her hand. If I become the third princess consort and win the martial chi test, no matter how many people rely on me, they can only shut up. Yuan Xiaoming's thin lips slightly hooked. So this is your idea. It's also because they thought that you couldn't go back after being expelled from the family, but they didn't know that you had already obtained the qualifications to participate in the martial chi competition in the guise of a beggar. This also means that you have automatically returned to the Hellion family's genealogy. The reason why Su Yanemo is so arrogant is because she is backed by the Su family. I've always felt that there's a pair of invisible hands behind the Su family controlling everything. Otherwise, just based on Su Yanmo's one or two moves, how could my Hellion family be reduced to such a state? Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. When I was young, I didn't remember, but I always knew that my grandfather was powerful. He was resourceful and not in a hurry. It's not an exaggeration to describe him. No matter how I think about it, it shouldn't be this end. Yuan Xiaoming's eyes lit up. So, you plan to take it one step at a time and force out the behind-the-scenes manipulator? Hellion Vivian faintly hummed, and her eyes were long. I will never let go of anyone who has hurt my family. Then let me see how far you can go. Yuan Ming's silver pupils were half-hooked, showing his bloodthirsty demonic nature. That night, the Huai family welcomed a distinguished guest. The royal family with a silver mask said that they were going to give a big gift to the Huai family. The Huai family felt that this was a blessing in disguise, and quickly came out to greet them. Who knew that they would receive a pair of scissors from eunuch Sunday? The royal family's original words were, in order to make your son more obedient, cut off his superfluous things, so that he won't go out in the future to indulge in wine and women, and let the Hellion third miss down. Huayan was so scared that his face changed. He screamed in horror and rolled on the ground. The royal family just looked at him indifferently. When they passed by, they only left a few cold words. Is her betrothal gift something you can give? Unfortunately, Huayan didn't hear this sentence clearly. So when he became half-disabled, he didn't know how he had offended the royal family. As for Hellion Mei, who had originally already calmed down and was preparing to marry, after hearing this news, her entire person was stupefied. How was this good for her? It was clear that she was going to be a widow after marrying. An immoral man she married. But the royal family's words were so beautiful that they didn't even have room to struggle. Su Yanemo, who had planned it all out, sat on the wooden chair in a daze. The maid hurried in and said that the elixir shop that she had invested a lot of money in recently was found to be problematic, and had been sealed by the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs. Sealed? Su Yanemo murmured in a daze. How is this possible? Does the Prime Minister know? The maid hung her head. The Prime Minister can't control it, as ministers can't run a shop privately. How could Su Yanemo not know this? However, in her impression, the people from the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs had never dared to touch her. That was why she had invested all her belongings in the elixir shop, intending to make a huge profit. She thought that even that little bitch could make money. She had so many connections she would definitely earn more than her. But now gone, everything is gone. Su Yanemo stood up and threw the teacup in front of her. Go and tell the Prime Minister to kill that bitch immediately. Yes, yes. The maid was so scared that she quickly left. But almost everyone in the capital knew what Su Yanemo had done. Not only was she harsh to her stepdaughter, but she was also thinking about the money of a stepdaughter who had been kicked out of the house. She was simply shameless. On the surface, no one said anything, but behind the scenes, they had already started to talk about it. This was the effect that Hellion Vivian wanted, to kill with a nod of the head. To deal with people like Su Yanemo, it was necessary to kill her bit by bit. Hellion Wei Wei put away the umbrella in her hand and strolled back into the courtyard. Her blood vessels started to faintly heat up. Finally, it was time for the martial chi competition. Before the competition, every participant had to collect their number 1 day in advance, and only when their number was called would they go on stage. Hellion Vivian originally wanted to go on her own, but when she went down the mountain, she happened to bump into her deskmate, who was looking sideways and giving orders to the servant who usually followed her around. Hellion Vivian felt that this scene was slightly familiar, but she couldn't remember where she had seen it before. When Beligaju turned around, his expressionless face made Hellion Vivian feel that it was unfamiliar. Who's there? Even his voice was a little cold. Chapter 233. Hellion Vivian rubbed the bridge of her nose and walked out. It's me. Sugar Daddy? When Beligaju's eyes were covered with the white cloth, he looked extremely clean and harmless. He was like a jade-like young master, peerless and magnificent. Hellion Vivian was helpless. I told you not to call me that. What were you and your servant talking about? You were so mysterious. Something might happen at home tomorrow, so I let him go back. Beligaju's voice was very light. Hellion Vivian had already thought that he was like her when he entered the school. His family's power was seized, so she understood and didn't continue to ask. She only asked, "What will you do if he leaves? Your eyes haven't recovered yet, right?" "I don't know." Beligaju slightly tilted his head, looking a little proud. "I'll probably have to stay in the school for the whole day. His Highness is definitely pretending." Shadow raised his eyes and looked at the sky. Because he was the one who sent him away. Hellion Vivian looked at her deskmate and thought for a moment. "Why don't you follow me down the mountain? Will I disturb you?" Beligaju fully demonstrated his politeness when necessary. However, this kind of politeness made Hellion Vivian even more feel that she should bring her deskmate along. "No, I'm just going down the mountain to get a token anyway." "Okay." Beligaju smiled and looked at his hand again. His voice was very pleasant. "It's just that I can't see right now, so it's not very convenient for me to walk." Hellion Vivian was a person of action. When she heard him say that, she directly walked over and held his hand. She walked forward without looking back, natural and handsome with a peaceful face. Beligaju paused for a moment. Then the corner of his mouth curved up. That curve was called Evil Plan Succeeded. The evening light shone down, elongating their shadows. The students coming and going could see that on the bluestone slope where Linning went down the mountain in groups. A gentle breeze blew and white petals fell. A girl with slightly dark skin was holding the hand of a young man who was so handsome that even heaven and earth paled in comparison. Their green and white robes fluttered gently as they were entangled together. They had been together for thousands of years. When Hellion Vivian received her token, she received it from the commoners. Along the way, she didn't see any familiar faces. They were all young men and women selected from various places. No one knew each other, so no one was surprised to see Hellion Vivian here. Hellion Vivian was also successful in getting the tag, but her deskmate's face was too eye-catching. She was surrounded by a group of people in no time. "By the way, why aren't you participating in the martial chi competition?" Hellion Vivian seemed to have thought of something. She turned sideways and looked at her deskmate with a hint of doubt in her eyes. Beligaju thought for a moment and looked very serious. "My eyes are injured. I can't participate in the competition." If Hellion Vivian knew his identity, she would definitely know that he was lying. But now Hellion Vivian only thought that he wanted to become famous in the martial chi competition just like her. She didn't expect that he would be so unlucky as to hurt his eyes. At that moment, she could only feel deep sympathy. She didn't say anything and continued to walk forward holding his hand. However, she didn't notice that Beligaju was slightly scheming. He knew that the prey he had set his eyes on had a fatal weakness. A stubborn and playful fox. Her claws were hard but the pads were too soft. As long as you mastered the right method, you could play with them in the palm of your hand. She was the same. The night was getting darker. When the two of them walked back, there weren't many people on the mountain road. Hellion Vivian hummed a song. Her voice was clear and the lines were deep. It was very pleasant to hear. "You know, I always think about the unhappy 15-year-old you. How I want to hold the crying you in my arms. Not sure of my shape, whether I can move or not, colliding with the world. Those wounds I finally healed one by one for you. One day I will grow old. I hope you will be satisfied. I didn't let down that 15-year-old. Rarely seen." Bailey Jiaju restrained that icy coldness of his. He tilted his head to the side and listened quietly. A ray of light flashed through those pair of deep eyes hidden under the white cloth. It was because he couldn't see that he was able to listen carefully. He had never heard such lyrics and music before. Even the musicians in the palace or other countries didn't know how to sing. Then, "Hellion Vivian, where did you learn these things?" It seemed that the prey he had set his eyes on had more secrets than he thought. Beligaju clenched his left hand. "What's wrong?" Hellion Vivian looked back and raised her eyebrows. Bailey Jiaju replied slowly, "It's nothing. You sing very well." Hellion Vivian paused and smiled. "I just hummed a few lines. How can it be considered a song? I heard it sung by others and thought it sounded good." Maintaining vigilance at all times, this was Hellion Wei. If it was someone else, they might be fooled by her words. However, she didn't know that the person standing in front of her was very scheming and ruthless. How could he be fooled with just a few words? "Is that so?" Bailey Jiaju curved his thin lips meaningfully. Hellion Vivian wanted to say something. All of a sudden her ears moved. She nimbly extended her hand and pulled Bailey Jiaju. At the same time, the umbrella in her other hand had already opened. In a flash, the concealed weapons fell one after another. Hellion Vivian felt an unprecedented sense of oppression. She wanted to mobilize all the martial qi to summon Yuan Xiaoming, but found that there was a ghostly figure behind her. "Be careful." Baligaju reached out to block. Without martial qi, his arm was scratched with a thick blood mark. Ha 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 ha! Gloomy laughter sounded from the night, like the terrible hoarseness of a snake slipping through the grass, accompanied by the cry of an owl from time to time, which made people feel creepy from the bottom of their hearts in the dark night. Hellion Vivian leaned to one side. Because she was holding someone in her hand, she couldn't launch her martial qi at all. This was her only weakness at present. When operating the wind, she had to be alone. But now, this weakness had become her fatal wound. Such a girl and a boy are not worthy of our help. Among the swaying shadows of the trees, a person with sallow skin and slightly green cheeks appeared in midair. Even though his face wasn't very ugly, but that pair of eyes carried a gloomy aura that made people feel extremely uncomfortable, especially the pointed fingers that were exposed under his black robe. Even more so made Wei Wei's willowy eyebrows wrinkle heavily. Moreover, they were not alone. Chapter 234. Ding Ling. The crisp sound of the metal bell was like a small ripple on the surface of a lake that was suddenly hit by raindrops. It abruptly spread out in the air, and the air that suddenly quieted down was filled with a kind of awe-inspiring atmosphere. She didn't know why, but every time the bell rang, the air that blew on her back became colder, just like a cold ghost. Hellion Vivian keenly felt that the surrounding temperature was rising at an imperceptible speed. Another person wearing a black robe walked over from afar. His face was covered by a cloak, and it was impossible to see his face clearly. However, the scepter in his hand was very special. On top of the scepter there was a bright red eye. She didn't know what kind of animal it was. Wherever he went, the temperature was as hot as magma, making people unable to get close. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. It was actually a peak gold rank. The other party's strength was much higher than hers. She once heard from Elder Huan that those who reached the peak of the gold rank would possess spiritual power. They would adjust their own martial qi according to their own martial practice, making it appear real and substantial. If one wanted to understand this method, they would need to possess a strong and pure enough martial qi, have a long enough lifespan to practice, and possess a superhuman perception in order to succeed. Those who broke through the peak of the gold rank were basically existences at the bone ash level. Even in the entire Dragon War Empire, there were only a few of them. And at this moment, the two people standing in front of Hellion Vivian were actually both peak gold rank. As the surrounding temperature became higher and higher, the brand under the black-robed person's feet became clearer and clearer. Clusters of flames rose from the ground. The legendary Purgatory Flame. Only the Fire Qilin could resist this attack. It was said that all living things that were placed in the Purgatory Flame would be burned to ashes by the Purgatory Flame. If other people saw this scene, they would definitely think of a way to escape. However, Hellion Vivian didn't let go of Baligaju's hand. This way it would definitely be difficult to fight. Only a few banging sounds could be heard. Although Hellion Vivian's small face didn't change much, a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of her mouth. It was as easy as stepping on an ant for the two of them to deal with her. "Your bones are quite tough." The man in black smiled coldly and raised the staff in his hand. "Since you can use a body without the slightest bit of martial qi to receive this move of mine, but this time you won't be so lucky." The black-clothed person leaped up. The flames around his body transformed into a scarlet flame beast that flapped its wings and broke free from the sea of fire. It opened its bloody mouth and circled back and forth, howling as it spat out raging flames, ferociously pouncing toward Wei Wei. If it was an ordinary person, they would have already been burned into a pile of ashes. However, Hellion Wei Wei used the umbrella in her hand and rotated the angle with one hand, blocking those raging flames. Bang! SSSS blood. The two people didn't give her any time to think. As soon as one person finished his attack, the other grabbed towards Hellion Vivian's back. Beligaju listened to the sound of the wind around him and turned around. He held Hellion Vivian in his arms and rolled towards the bushes at the side. Damn it! I actually missed. A blind person's reaction is actually so fast. The black-robed person with long black fingernails clenched his hands in displeasure. Looking at the person who quickly disappeared into the night, a trace of malice flashed in his eyes. The person with the scepter raised his eyes, his voice indifferent and filled with a thick aura of death. If they roll down from here, it will be a cliff. Perhaps they would have already been smashed to pieces. That girl is a good seedling. She can actually receive 2 of my attacks. If you weren't here, perhaps she could have received a few more of my attacks. Unfortunately, she was so blind and blocked the path of the Phoenix girl. Who's that brat beside her? His reaction is quite fast. Don't worry about it. Anyway, they won't survive. Drip drip. Water dripped on her face. When Hellion Vivian woke up, her first reaction was to look at her tablemate. The cloth covering the man's eyes was still on, but the side of his face was scratched by a rock. He probably got injured while protecting her when they rolled down. His arm also needed to be bandaged. But obviously there weren't any healing herbs here. They seemed to have fallen into a cave, and below them were cliffs and precipices. These precipices became a natural barrier against the wind, and the inside of the cave was another lush scene. There was a high-hanging waterfall on the cliff that flowed down into the pool. Surrounded by green trees, the pool was clear and bright, like a piece of transparent crystal. There was no way to walk in front. Hellion Vivian tried to move her arms and legs. Her limbs were limp as if they had been crushed, but there was no pain. First, she took out a pill and made the man swallow it. Then she glanced at the black blood flowing out of his arm. Without any hesitation, she lowered her head and sucked the blood out, spitting it to the side. It was indeed poisonous. But fortunately, the poison didn't enter the bone. According to reason, it should be her injury that was more serious. It was just that at the moment of falling, he had been protecting her with himself, so he was in such a mess. Hellion Vivian was grateful, but at the same time, she was a little worried. She called Yuan Ming several times, but that guy seemed to be dead. Was there a problem with this cave? Speaking of which, even when they were fighting on the mountain just now, Yuan Ming couldn't wake up. In other words, there was indeed a problem here. However, as long as she was not dead, everything was not over yet. However, she didn't have much time to waste. Tomorrow was the martial chi competition. If she didn't show up on time, she would be judged to automatically withdraw from the competition. Then her long-term efforts would be ruined. Hellion Wei Wei lowered her head and looked at the bottomless cliff below her feet. She decided to first recover, then solve this matter. She slowly closed her eyes. Her thoughts moved slightly, and she felt as if there was an extra kind of gas in her body, like a stream of water trickling through, warming her whole body. Hellion Vivian spread the airflow to the major acupoints around her body, trying to change their positions so that she could break through the choking point and reach a new height. However, there was a sharp pain in her chest and various acupoints. The blood in her whole body began to surge restlessly, as if it was going to burst out of the skin. Hellion Vivian endured the pain, stubbornly refusing to restrain the airflow that was getting more and more out of control. Then she suddenly exhaled, and her whole body overflowed with a colorless light. As if it had sensed this light, a faint sigh suddenly came from within the cave. Chapter 235. It's been 10 years. For the past 10 years no one has entered this place. Just as I'm about to pass away, someone has entered. Could this be the will of the heavens? That old and gentle voice echoed in the valley. It was as if a senior monk was reciting sutras in the morning. The sound of Buddha's voice was steady and steady. The cliff of reflection was very steep. The distance from the bottom to the top was more than 10,000 feet. Even if a person with peerless martial arts jumped down, There was no place for him to lean on. He would be smashed into meat paste by the force of the fall. Furthermore, this place was surrounded by mountains. The terrain was extremely dangerous. No one had ever reached the bottom of the cliff. Then why was there someone in this cave? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Her pair of phoenix eyes turned sharp. Let's go in. A slightly cold voice sounded from the side of her ear. Only then did Hellion Wei Wei discover that her deskmate had already woken up. That handsome and fair face was still stained with bloodstains. Under his ink-black hair was a pure white cloth. Just so happened to cover his eyes. Not only did it not make him lose a trace of his bearing, it instead made him look more demonic and soul-stirring. Hellion Vivian nodded. Naturally, she reached out and grabbed his arm. Her voice was clear. Watch your feet. There are vines. Okay. Beligaju's lips curled. When he walked over, he tried to use the martial chi in his body. His thin lips carried a faint smile. When the two of them went through the cave, they had to bend down. When they were close, Hellion Vivian felt as if her entire body was being pulled into the embrace of the person behind her. Especially when his breath brushed past her ear from time to time, it made her subconsciously shrink her neck. She didn't know if it was because he couldn't see, but when his hand reached out from behind, it seemed to slide past the softness in front of her chest. Hellion Vivian felt that it was too embarrassing to talk about such things, so she could only silently change her position. She directly held his finger, went around the surrounding vines, and pushed aside the weeds. She saw an old man in a kasaya sitting in the middle of the cave with his head slightly lowered. If he hadn't been talking just now, it would have been very easy for others to mistake him for a corpse. Especially at this time, his hair had already grown to his waist, and his white hair covered his eyes. So there are two people. Hellion Vivian didn't ask him how he found out that they were two people. After all, anyone who could live in this place for so many years without dying of old age must have something special about them. Why aren't you talking? The old man tilted his head, his white hair fluttering in the wind. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. I just fell. I'm still adapting. The old man was taken aback before he suddenly laughed. This is the first time this penniless monk has seen such an open-minded person. Young lady, one of you is injured? The smell of blood is a little too strong. Hellion Vivian glanced at Beligaju's arm. Yes, it's a minor injury. When she was outside, she was used to speaking half-truths. The old man didn't mind and only said, Young lady, I want you to do this penniless monk a favor. Beligaju frowned and didn't say anything. Hellion Vivian laughed. That depends on what kind of favor it is. The old man's laughter became deeper. Young lady, you are really interesting. Since you feel that this penniless monk is in danger, why don't you just help this penniless monk? Why do you need to see what kind of favor it is? When interacting with others, one should be vigilant. It's to protect oneself. But if it's within one's capabilities, one should help as much as possible. Hellion Vivian's words were indifferent, but it was her way of doing things. The old man was surprised by Hellion Vivian's intelligence and didn't take it to heart. A hint of admiration appeared in his eyes. If it's you, you should deliver this penniless monk's message. Message? What message? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Master, what you want me to do is to help you deliver a message. But the problem is that we can't even protect ourselves. Whether we can get out or not is another matter. The old man laughed. The entrance of Fox Valley opens once every month on the day of the full moon. It only lasts for a short 2 hours. According to Fushi's technique, the entrance is a path of reincarnation with 9 deaths and 1 life. There are 9 paths that lead to the netherworld, and only one of them can successfully enter the valley. Since you can enter, I believe that you have the ability to leave. Hellion Vivian was speechless. We just happened to fall in. The old man shook his head. It's not a coincidence, it's the will of the heavens. When this penniless monk fell into this valley, this penniless monk used his remaining spiritual power to make a final prophecy. In the prophecy, this penniless monk once said that there would be a fated person and that all he had to do was wait. However, 1 year after another passed. It's been a full 10 years. Just when this penniless monk thought that this penniless monk would be buried with this secret, the two of you appeared. Hellion Vivian didn't believe in this, but she had to think of a way to get out. After some thought, she said, if I can get out, I'll definitely deliver Master's message. The two of you will definitely be able to get out. The old man seemed very determined. He paused and said, 10 years ago, this penniless monk made a mistake. Hellion Vivian listened quietly and didn't say anything. The old man's voice was very deep and had a mysterious aura. Back then, I didn't listen to senior brother's advice and got involved in the secular world. I once prophesied that the one who obtained the Phoenix Girl would obtain the world. Unexpectedly, this prophecy put this penniless monk in a dilemma. Phoenix Girl? Hellion Vivian always had a feeling that she was about to hear a shocking secret. Usually behind this kind of secret there would be a feud involved. Sure enough, the old man continued, after that day, the elders who shouldn't have asked about the affairs of the world found me. They told me that I must find out who was the Phoenix Girl. If this penniless monk didn't say anything, they would capture all the girls of that age and kill them all. Elders? The elders of the 4 great clans? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Aren't they the guardians of the Dragon War Empire? That was what her memories told her. Beligaju curved his thin lips and hid in the shadows. There was a faint ridicule at the corner of his mouth. The old man said with difficulty, that's just what it looks like on the surface. If this penniless monk didn't experience that matter, I wouldn't know that they were such people. This penniless monk originally thought that they wouldn't be so ruthless. At the beginning they didn't speak for 3 days and 3 nights. However, in these 3 days and 3 nights they killed no less than 30 girls. This penniless monk had no choice but to agree to make another prophecy. This time Master found the Phoenix Girl. Hellion Vivian felt that things weren't that simple. The old man's eyes paused. They found her, but they encountered some problems. At that time it wasn't appropriate for the 4 great elders to contact this penniless monk, so they sent someone. Who? Hellion Vivian had a feeling that the next thing was the key. Chapter 236. The old man's voice was hoarse. Hellion Guangyao, the son-in-law of the Hellion family who married into the family. Hellion Weiwei's fingers paused. She actually didn't expect such an answer. Her eyes flashed with astonishment as she glanced at her deskmate beside her. Her deskmate acted as if he did not hear the old man's words. His face was still indifferent and evil, without the slightest change in emotion. At that time, someone from the Hellion family had married into the family, so Hellion Guangyao invited me to the general's residence. On the surface it was to pray for Madame Hellion, but in reality it was to make it convenient for me to make the second prophecy. When the old man said this, Hellion Vivian immediately recalled the most painful scene in the past. When her mother died, Hellion Guangyao did not even prepare a proper coffin for her. He even asked the maids to take a tattered mat, casually wrapped her up and threw her into the inner hall. He did a comprehensive job of keeping up appearances outside, crying and making a fuss. Her mother's body was cold, so he helped Su Yin and Mo up. Hellion Vivian had never experienced this before, but the pain imprinted in this body made her clench her fists tightly. Why did it have to be at the general's residence? There are 2 places in the capital with the strongest spiritual power. One is the Imperial Palace, and the other is the general's residence. It is too troublesome to enter the Imperial Palace. Moreover, the retired emperor was still in power at that time. The elders of the 4 great families did not have the guts to do these things openly. As the old man spoke, his voice lowered. Perhaps they planned it from the beginning, but something went wrong in the middle. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. What do you mean by something went wrong? The people they sent were not that reliable. The old man said slowly, everyone is selfish, not to mention for their own children. There are 3 girls of similar age in the general's residence. The youngest one is still far away, but the other 2 are only a few months apart. The prophecy shows that in 10 years, the Phoenix Girl will be reincarnated, and the place where she will descend is the general's residence. Hellion Vivian looked up and waited for the old man to continue. However, it was this last prophecy that brought this poor monk a fatal disaster. In order to make the elders of the 4 great clans believe that her biological daughter is the Phoenix Girl, the first madam of the general's residence, Madame Su, sent many men of sacrifice to assassinate me when I was weak after performing the ritual. At this point, the old man paused and suddenly raised his head. Actually, the other girl, the legitimate daughter of the Hellion family, Hellion Vivian, is the real Phoenix girl. There was a rumbling sound. Lightning flashed across the sky, and the light from the corner of its eye fell on Hellion Vivian's clear eyes, reflecting a cold light. Beligaju's thin lips curved upwards. So that was the case. No wonder he was not surprised that Hellion Vivian was the Phoenix girl. However, the methods of those elders were as disgusting as always. The old man did not know that one of the two people who fell in was Hellion Vivian. He lowered his eyes, and his sunken cheeks carried a deep sense of guilt. This poor monk has only done this one wrong thing in his life. Heaven's secrets cannot be revealed, but I went against heaven's will. Now that the Phoenix girl has reincarnated, this poor monk only hopes that you can find her and tell her about her past. All these years, this poor monk has been wondering why those elders want to obtain the Phoenix girl. Now this poor monk understands that they do not only want to obtain the Phoenix girl, but they are also becoming more and more dissatisfied with their current power. In order to be able to resist the imperial family, they put in a lot of effort. Actually, if it was just a normal power struggle, it would be fine. Back then, when this poor monk was in the capital, this poor monk discovered a secret related to them. This secret is hard for this poor monk to let go of. Without anyone's permission, they wantonly hunted sacred objects, as if they wanted to do something. This poor monk is a person who practices Buddhism. This poor monk is really worried that the future of the world will fall into the hands of these people. Therefore, this poor monk wishes to ask you to pass this message to the Phoenix girl, so that she will not become a puppet of the four great families. She is not that stupid. Bailey Jiaju's voice was faint as he opened his mouth. His handsome face always gave people the illusion that a god had descended. The old man glanced in his direction, and his eyes suddenly shook. He did not understand why this man was so similar to the statue he saw in the holy domain. There were other emotions in his old and chaotic eyes. However, this thought did not come to his mind. He heard Hellion Vivian say, "Great Master, in fact I am Hellion Vivian." She touched the bridge of her nose, and an embarrassed smile appeared on her face. The old man paused, and his fingers trembled. "You are? But why did you become like this?" Hellion Vivian knew that the old man was talking about her skin. After thinking for a while, a small tomato appeared in her hand, and then she wiped it across her face. Her astonishingly beautiful face was revealed under the moonlight. "After mother passed away, Madame Su poisoned me." Hellion Vivian sneered. She was probably worried that I would steal her daughter's limelight. However, it is also thanks to her thoughts. Otherwise, who knows what kind of trouble my face would cause. This was also the reason why Hellion Vivian did not restore her original appearance. The old man sighed. "It is all this poor monk's fault. If it were not for this poor monk, if it were not for Great Master, I am afraid that I would have become that puppet right now." Hellion Wei chuckled as she continued his words. Then with a backhand wipe, she turned that little face into a slightly darker color. The old man looked at her, and a burst of laughter entered her ears. Fate really makes fools of people. I never thought that I would be able to see the Phoenix girl again before I passed away. I can make up for my past mistakes. Great Master, you are too serious. The one who made the real mistake is not you. Hellion Vivian's eyes turned cold. The old man looked at the moonlight outside. "It is getting late, Phoenix girl." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She saw the old man move his left hand, and his palm seemed to be filled with endless spiritual energy. It flowed along the lines, and all of it flowed into the top of Hellion Vivian's head. Countless moves flashed through Hellion Vivian's mind, and the countless inner chi continuously protected her heart meridian. Hellion Vivian felt as if her whole body was immersed in a warm stream of water. Then her whole body shook, and the flowing wind lifted her into the middle of the air. Her white robe fluttered with the wind, and the long sleeves floated in the air. With the green robe as the background, clouds and mist appeared, giving people the impression that a fairy had descended. The crime this poor monk committed in the past will probably cause a calamity to the world. Now this poor monk has transferred all of his spiritual energy to you. I only hope that the Phoenix girl can save the people from the calamity when the world is in chaos. Chapter 237. Helly and Vivian landed on the ground and looked at the old man who was about to be extinguished. The Fox Valley is about to close. You should leave as soon as possible. With this monk's spiritual energy, your journey will be much easier. Once you leave the Fox Valley, walk towards the entrance of the cave. When you reach the end, you will arrive at the capital. This monk only hopes that everything is not too late. After the old man finished speaking, his head tilted and his entire body seemed to be dehydrated and turned into white powder. In the end, only a glowing relic was left. Pick up that relic. Unexpectedly at this time, Yuan Ming actually spoke from the celestial fantasy space. Helly and Vivian raised her eyebrows. What happened to you before? The one who just passed away was the only senior monk who was over 100 years old in this world. With my current ability, I can only hide in the celestial fantasy space when I meet such a senior monk. Otherwise, you will be in danger, Yuan Ming explained. Now that he has passed away, the last gift he left for you is this relic. The relic of a senior monk is more precious than a dragon pill. After you eat it, your martial chi will definitely increase greatly. Helly and Vivian's voice was faint. No, I won't eat it. Woman, you are really a strange person. You obviously like to do things by hook or by crook, but you insist on doing things that are inexplicable. Yuan Ming's thin lips curled up sinisterly. Helly and Vivian bent down to pick up the relic and put it on her body. Let's go, we will find a way out. The two of them walked in the dark. Fortunately, they were both nimble people. Otherwise, they would not be able to walk out of the Fox Valley in just a short 2 hours. However, walking out of the Fox Valley did not mean that everything was over. They still had a long way to go. If they continued to walk, it would become very dark. The old man said that this path would lead to the capital, but he did not say where it would lead to. The cave seemed to have no end. It was so dark that one couldn't even see one's fingers in front of one's face. The surroundings were full of unknown plants, and there were strange stones everywhere. It was abnormally terrifying. Looking at them in a trance, those stones looked like the faces of demons, the fangs of bloody wolves, and the broken limbs of evil demons. Most of these stones had uneven edges. One could even cruelly say that these stones had thorns, stone thorns. When Helly and Vivian walked in, her clothes had been cut by the sharp stones. She didn't care and only held Beligaju's hand as she walked forward, afraid that he would be cut. However, the sound had already awakened a certain kind of creature in the night. The sound of flapping wings could be heard, and the blood-red dots also began to move rapidly. As they smelled the sweet scent of blood, they became excited. They stared at the intruder with their blood-red eyes, preparing to pounce forward and suck the blood of their prey dry. It was a vampire bat. Helly and Vivian narrowed her eyes and took out the silver knife in her hand, ready to fight at any moment. Stand behind me. Okay. Beligaju took a step back, but did not lower his head. Instead, he looked deeply at the young girl standing in front of him. There was a hint of playfulness in the corner of his mouth, and then he narrowed his eyes. The surrounding environment did not affect the darkness and coldness of his body at all. His white robes and green robes were dyed completely black at this moment, perfectly wrapping around his slender figure, making him look even taller and more frightening. His perfect inverted triangular figure supported the ceiling of the cave. His cold, handsome face was expressionless, and his pair of eyes were like the cold stars in a winter night, emotionlessly meeting the gazes of those vampire bats. His long and narrow eyes revealed an irresistible darkness and depth, appearing wild and unrestrained, full of evil charm, as they shot through the white cloth. Those vampire bats seemed to have sensed something, and they suddenly quieted down, not daring to approach for a long time. Helly and Vivian was still puzzled when Beligaju opened his mouth. Is it because of the spiritual energy that the holy monk just passed on to you? Is that why they don't dare to attack? Probably. Helly and Vivian was skeptical. Spiritual energy had such a big effect? Beligaju's voice was indifferent. That's why we have to hurry up and leave. What if the spiritual energy disappears? Okay. Helly and Vivian's fingers tightened, and she nimbly walked forward. We have to hurry up and leave. If we don't make it in time for tomorrow's weapons competition, His Highness will definitely kill me. Beligaju paused for a moment, then raised his eyebrows. Kill you? Why? I had an agreement with him before. Hellion Vivian said after thinking for a moment. I have to win first place in the martial chi competition. Beligaju smiled faintly. Don't tell me you want to marry him? Hellion Vivian's foot slipped. I guessed right. Beligaju said as they walked. But it's not bad to marry him. Doesn't everyone say that he's the #1 young master in the capital? Hellion Vivian found it a little strange. Her deskmate actually praised others? Well, I didn't marry him for that. Anyway, there was no one here, so Hellion Vivian didn't have so many concerns when she spoke. In addition, talking made her feel more awake and less sleepy. It seemed that there was still a long way to go in the cave, so they had to talk about something to not be bored. Beligaju's eyes narrowed dangerously. Then why did you marry him? Hellion Vivian continued to walk around the vampire bats in front of them. You don't need to know that. In an instant, Beligaju's side face turned cold, and his tone was slow. Aren't you afraid that the royal family will know that you married him for other reasons? He already knew. Hellion Vivian said without turning her head. Moreover, he married me for his own reasons. Oh, he wanted to hear what he thought about marrying her. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Did you forget? Didn't I tell you that the third prince probably likes men? Of course I can't be sure. But his current situation is that he urgently needs a princess to help him. Use you to help him? Beligaju's mocking tone was very obvious. Hellion Vivian of course also heard it. Don't underestimate me. I'm also very awesome. Then what about the wedding night? Beligaju asked casually. Hellion Vivian's thin lips curved. How can there be a wedding night in a contract marriage? What's more, I suspect that the third prince doesn't have feelings for people when he doesn't drink. He looks like a big block of ice from head to toe. I think the third prince will be very, very interested in what you're saying now. Won't have feelings for people. Big ice cube? Very good. He had to give her a unique wedding night. Chapter 238. Hellion Jiaoer's heart was getting more and more disgusted. In the past, the two sisters were close because they knew that they would help each other in the future. After all, no one's home would be bad, and the closer they were, the more prosperous they would be. Currently, Hellion Mei had clearly already become Hellion Jiaoer's disgrace. An unmarried younger sister who had already privately pledged her life to a man. In addition, she had also married into that kind of family. Who knew how in the future she would ask for things from her side? When Hellion Mei thought of this, she simply didn't even try to stop it. Hellion Mei watched Hellion Mei drink that cup of poisonous tea. Anyway, she won't die, but it will suppress her martial chi. The real poison can't enter the Phoenix building. Even if the plan is tight, it will fail. So those people cleverly replace the poison with the colorless and tasteless huagong powder. This kind of huagong powder will not have any effect at first. Even if it is put in the tea, it won't be noticed. Its effect is very slow, but it will completely invade the poisoned person's body when it works. Hellion Jiaoer lowered her eyes and slowly walked into the rest area, preparing for the second game. According to the Elder's plan, they will not directly kill the retired emperor, because in that way, her godlike man will definitely find out about this matter and thoroughly investigate it. At that time, not only will the elders feel troubled, but even her marriage will be affected. At this time, the elders will find a way to put the retired emperor under house arrest and push a fake to the throne, or directly make the retired emperor a figurehead, so that he can no longer speak. No matter what, this matter will be carried out in secret. However, the people in the Phoenix building were not aware of the conspiracy that covered the whole martial chi competition like dark clouds. Sitting on the wooden chair, the retired emperor looked at the competition below and said to Eunuch's son, who was standing beside him, "Go and see what that cold boy is doing. On such a day, he still oversleeps." Yes. Eunuch's son smiled and handed over the teacup in his hand. "This is the new leaf of this year. You taste it first, this servant will send someone to ask." The retired emperor nodded, just took a sip of tea and closed his eyes. All of a sudden, the air behind him seemed to have changed abruptly. The retired emperor's expression changed, and he suddenly opened his eyes. Pung! The wooden window closed, cutting off the view from the outside. Eunuch's son raised his eyes. He only had time to see a flash of a black robe before he was knocked unconscious. A stern look flashed across the retired emperor's eyes. The 2 or 3 ministers in shadow by his side all stood up and stood in front of the retired emperor. Their first reaction was to shout for help, but they found that the moment they tried to use their martial chi, their chests tightened. Puff! Blood spurted out. Not only those shadows, even the retired emperor, who originally had martial chi to protect himself, covered his chest and leaned back heavily on the wooden chair. He looked at the 2 old men in black robes in front of him with a dignified expression. "You 2 are very daring." One of the old men laughed sinisterly. His black robe fell down, and every move of his made people feel very uncomfortable. Our retired emperor is indeed smart. He didn't even ask who we are or what we are here for and started to blame us. How daring. The old minister who was sitting paralyzed on the ground stood up with all his might. He clung to the window and was just about to shout at the window, "Come, people." That old man suddenly grabbed him and pressed him to the ground. Only a clear creaking sound was heard. That old minister's neck tilted, and he became a soft corpse. Only then did people notice that the black-robed old man's fingernails were not like the fingernails of an ordinary person at all. They were so black that it made people feel cold in their hearts. The shadows wanted to use their own internal energy, but they found that the more injured they were, the faster their martial chi was lost. "Old ghost, don't waste time. Quickly get rid of them." The other black-robed old man also walked over. He held the staff in his hand, and when he lowered his head to look at the retired emperor, a trace of evil appeared at the corner of his mouth. The retired emperor was indeed the retired emperor. At this time he could still remain calm in the face of danger. "You killed this emperor, but you can't escape." "Ha ha." That eerie laughter sounded again. "We never thought of killing you. We only want to replace you." As he spoke, that elder waved his long sleeves, and a few more figures appeared behind him. Those people were about the same size as the ministers who accompanied the retired emperor. Even Eunuch's son, who was standing beside the retired emperor, was found a suitable figure. These figures were holding a human skin mask in their hands. Obviously they wanted to kill all these people and then replace them. Bang! Outside the window the second drum sounded. Just like what the old man said, the martial artists were all busy with the competition, and no one turned around to look in this direction. Even if someone saw it, they would think that the retired emperor was resting or discussing important matters with the ministers. Who would think in this direction? In addition, there was no sound of fighting here, so no one would notice. The sky gradually darkened and the clouds churned and surged. In the cave, Hellion Vivian looked at the mark she had carved before and frowned. Those who didn't know would think that they had encountered a ghost wall. However, Hellion Vivian knew that someone must have set up a trap to prevent the people who came here from leaving so easily. There's something strange about this place. Hellion Vivian stopped in her tracks, and her lazy little face carried a sense of caution that wasn't usually there. The old man didn't say that there would be a trap around the exit. It was obvious that this trap had appeared later. Hellion Vivian used the light of dawn to look to the left of the wall. That's a corpse? Bailey Jiaju also stopped in his tracks. It was not because he had seen anything. After all, his eyes were still covered with a white cloth. It was just that the stench of corpses around him made him furrow his long eyebrows. Hellion Vivian walked over but didn't get too close to the corpse. Instead, she squatted on the ground. There seems to be a picture carved here. Baligaju raised his eyebrows and looked in the direction of Hellion Vivian. His expression didn't change at all. Hellion Vivian blew away the dust on the ground. Indeed, there was a picture on the marble. The picture was of the most famous Buddha cutting his flesh to feed the eagle in the Buddhist scriptures. It was just that the flesh here was more like blood, because there was a small blood trough there. A sentence was carved at the bottom of the mural. "If I don't enter hell, who will?" Hellion Vivian stared at the blood trough, narrowed her eyes and directly cut with the dagger. Blood flowed down her palm and dripped into the blood trough in the picture. Chapter 239. The blood with spiritual energy surged out as if there was a response. All of them gathered at one point, forming a large Buddhist seal. Faintly, Hellion Wei heard the divine monk's deep voice in her ear for the last time. There was even a hint of a smile in that voice. "I told you if it's you there's no problem at all. Hellion Vivian still maintained her original posture, only to hear a crack. With the formation of the Buddhist seal, a gap appeared in the stone wall amid the golden light. The corpse moved naturally, and a large piece of light shone in. The two old men in black standing in the room only felt a shock under their feet, and the dust on the roof drifted everywhere. What happened? One of the old men in black looked at the figure behind him. The figure shook his head. The old man in black narrowed his eyes. Is it an earthquake? But they didn't care about such a thing. No matter what it is, let's solve these first. The man holding the stick was obviously more ruthless. The old man in black licked the blood on his fingertips and smiled. What's the hurry? Anyway, these people have been poisoned by our cultivation dissipation powder. Even if they don't die, when the time comes, most of their internal strength will be abolished. What's more, they also use their internal strength. Do you want to fight back? Won't the internal organs be broken? Aren't you afraid of being discovered by doing this? The civil official questioned sternly, coughing with blood overflowing from the corner of his mouth. Ha 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 ha. Discovered? The old man seemed to have heard something stupid and laughed mockingly. Now everyone's attention is focused on the martial chi competition. Who knows that we have secretly changed the day? If I say there is someone. A clear voice suddenly sounded from behind the crowd, and the cold momentum seemed to come directly from purgatory. The two old men in black robes stiffened at the same time and hurriedly turned around, only to see a white figure standing coldly behind them like a ghost. At the same time, a torrential downpour suddenly surged in from the side of the wall. The black-clothed old man couldn't open his eyes because of the rain. He could only squint his eyes and try his best to distinguish. There was a trace of uncertainty in his voice. Who is it? The white figure slowly walked forward. For some reason, his clothes, which should have been soaked by the rain, were fluttering in the wind, as if he was an emissary from hell. The atmosphere seemed to have suddenly dropped to the freezing point as the person approached. The old man in black gradually felt a heavy sense of oppression. It was as if an invisible hand was squeezing everyone's heart. With a light twist, blood splattered everywhere, and life instantly turned into ashes. While she was in a daze, a clear outline of his incomparably cold face was carved out by the light. He leaned against the door frame with a cold expression. His eyes were covered with a white cloth, and his two enviable long legs were slightly crossed. His amber eyes reflected the light. This posture made him look exceptionally handsome, full of a sense of asceticism. The other person's fierce eyes were like a sharp knife against the necks of the two black-clothed elders. The next second, their throats would be pierced. The black-clothed old man with a weapon looked at Hellion Vivian in front of him incredulously. Suddenly, his face was shocked and his eyes widened in surprise. Shouldn't this woman be dead? Why was she here? Furthermore, what was with that overpowering spiritual energy? Now Hellion Vivian was like a phoenix reborn from the fire. Her whole body was shining with a light that was difficult to look at directly. It seemed that as long as she waved her wings gently, the flame from hell could burn everything into ashes in an instant. But before she started, Yuan Xiaoming opened his mouth from the fantasy space. Woman, this atmosphere is not right. There seems to be the smell of cultivation dissipation powder in the air. Your future grandfather was poisoned. If you don't treat him, he is likely to die at that age. You should consider whether to take the opportunity to gain some favor in front of your future grandfather, or kill those two people first. Hellion Weiwei was originally full of murderous intent, but the corners of her mouth twitched twice when Yuan Xiaoming called her future grandfather. What the hell is this kind of address? Before Hellion Vivian could make a decision, her arm was pulled over. You go to help the retired emperor heal. The man's voice was very deep, as if he had been accustomed to the commanding tone. Hellion Vivian looked sideways at him. She could only see her deskmate's blindfolded eyes. His face was noble and indifferent, arrogant as before, but cold. The old man in black with a stick narrowed his eyes and looked at the man in front of him. He sneered. You want to stop the old man by yourself? While he was speaking, he took out his staff and propped it on the ground. The flames were like a scarlet flame mythical beast that flapped its wings and escaped from the sea of fire. It stared ferociously at Bailey Jiaju and pounced. The flickering shadow in the firelight completely set off his devilish and dark demeanor, just like that of Satan in the dark night. The surrounding temperature was almost at its peak. The scorching heat wave tore Bailey Jiaju's moon-white lapel until it fluttered violently. Looking from afar, it was as if a white lotus in full bloom in the sky was about to be swallowed up by the fire. Yet, he only calmly and unhurriedly stretched out his hand and slowly tore off the strip of cloth covering his face, and threw it to the side with the wind. Then, slowly opening his eyelids, his ink-black pupils seemed to be dyed with a touch of golden light, aiming at the pupils of the red flame beast. The red flame beast suddenly stopped and then stiffened. Then, with a more terrifying momentum than before, it turned to the old man in black who was casting the spell and suddenly opened its bloody mouth. The old man in black didn't even have time to be surprised. Almost in a thousandth of a second, the thin barrier was licked by the monstrous flame and instantly turned into wisps of steam. The flame gradually wrapped around his whole body. The only thing he could feel was the pain of burning flesh. In his ears was a voice that only he could hear, as if it came from hell. "Dare to touch my prey, you should pay the price." Pung! The old man in black fell to the ground. Everyone opened their eyes wide in surprise and looked at Baligaju in disbelief. Especially those ministers, they didn't even dare to believe that there was such an expert in this world. Looking at the clothes he wore, he should be a student of White Academy. Only to be able to destroy the flame in an instant, to kill and take a life with only one move to destroy a martial cultivator. Was this something an ordinary student could do? This man, who was he? The ministers looked at each other in dismay, full of doubts. Only Hellion Vivian didn't look at this side, but observed everyone's injuries and state. When her hands touched the retired emperor, she found that the cultivation dissipation powder this time was different from the past. Chapter 240. Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows and went to touch the second person's hand. Bursts of laughter overflowed from the throat of another old man in black like a ghost. "Ha ha ha, don't waste your energy. This is not an ordinary cultivation dissipation powder. There is also a medicine in it. No matter how you try to solve it, you won't be able to solve it." He is not wrong. In addition to the cultivation dissipation powder, there is also the bone eroding powder. The retired emperor's entourage was never short of imperial physicians. When this sentence came out, everyone was shocked. The competition outside the building was still in full swing. But at this time no one was in the mood to watch. No one would have thought that a feast would turn into a disaster. The bone-eroding powder has been a poison that has been lost for many years, colorless and tasteless. For people without martial qi, perhaps it would only make people feel weak all over. But for people with strong martial qi, at the moment of operation, the poison would penetrate into the body. If within 3 hours the antidote was not obtained, even if the gods descended, there was no way to reverse the situation. As soon as the imperial physician's voice fell, a minister next to him could not support and fell to the ground. His face blew, not because of anger, but a sign of the poison. After using martial qi, the bone-eroding powder would be triggered. Looking at the scene in front of him, the retired emperor also followed the expression on his face. The black-clothed elder laughed out loud again, his voice echoing in the room. "Do you think you can be saved just because 2 little brats came? In this world, there are only a few people who can detoxify the bone-eroding poison. I would like to see how long you can hold on." Hearing this, Baligaju's figure moved. His eyes and eyebrows were cold, his sleeves fluttering. The powerful martial qi seemed to hold up an endless dome, the mist surging. Even if you have more martial qi, you can't withstand such consumption. You have talent, but you are too tender. You are only in the water rank. Oh, water can extinguish fire, but it may not be able to extinguish this old man. The old man in black looked and suddenly sneered. While speaking, his attack was fierce and sharp, as if in the next second he could take away Baligaju's name. Baligaju's tone was not the slightest bit chaotic. His voice was faint, but with a trace of cold arrogance. "Oh? Is that so?" The black-clothed old man was so shocked by the imposing manner of this sentence that he stopped moving. In the next moment, the water droplet that had landed on the black-clothed old man's body suddenly blossomed into a flower of ice. Then, several sharp ice crystals grew out of the flower of ice. These ice crystals were like madly growing vines, instantly piercing a bloody hole in his body. Baligaju picked him up with one hand and said coldly, "Tell me, where is the antidote?" I didn't expect the retired emperor to have such a person by his side. Old Ghost and I were actually defeated by a brat whose hair is all grown out. However, don't expect this old man to take out the antidote. Before he finished speaking, a trace of dark red blood flowed out of the black-clothed elder's mouth. He actually committed suicide by taking poison. Not only him, but even the shadows standing behind him fell down one after another. A burst of fog rose up. Other than the sizzling sound of corroding bones, there were only the faint gasps of the ministers. Hellion Vivian looked at the black-clothed elder, who had turned into a pool of blood. Apart from the bones, there was not a single trace left behind. She raised her eyebrows. This method was used to eliminate evidence. It seemed that the other party was very afraid of letting people know where they came from. Retired Emperor, what should we do now? His death meant that the antidote was gone. How could the ministers not be anxious? The retired emperor turned his head and looked at the imperial physician. Minister Chun, do you have a way? The imperial physician shook his head. It was very troublesome. The poison of the bone-eroding powder is too strong, and there is only one chance to detoxify it. If the wrong herb is used, the poisoned person's blood will immediately flow backward and he will die suddenly. Suddenly, the room fell into silence. Death was like a pair of invisible hands pinching everyone's throats. At this moment, Hellion Vivian, who had been standing at the side for a long time, opened her mouth and said, I have a way. Her voice was very clear and faint. However, it made the ministers subconsciously frown. When they looked at Hellion Vivian again, there was a look of inquiry in their eyes. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. What? It seems that you don't believe me. The retired emperor knew her temperament very well. He knew that this girl would never have any misgivings because of the other party's status. He smiled and said, We are all people who are about to die. What is there to not believe? Girl, if you can cure this bone-eroding poison, I promise that not only me, but all the ministers present will owe you a favor. If you need it in the future, you can use it at any time. With the retired emperor's words, it will be much more convenient for me to do it. Hellion Vivian moved her eyes and helped Eunuch Sun, who had woken up. Eunuch Sun, go and ask people to prepare 7 big bathtubs. Boil the hot water and prepare a jar of wine for all the ministers. Eunuch Sun was stunned. Bathtub? What did this mean? Was she going to detoxify or bathe? One of the ministers also opened his mouth. His attitude was very good. This old man doesn't mean that I don't believe in the little girl, but this bone-eroding powder is the most taboo. Even a master who has reached the peak of the gold rank may not be able to force this poison out. If this old man remembers correctly, you shouldn't have any martial chi on you, right? In that case, there is no need to take the risk. This old man is afraid that it will implicate you. General Naylan is right. The imperial doctor coughed lightly and said, The most terrible thing about bone-eroding powder is that anyone who wants to force the poison out of the poisoned person's body through martial chi will not only fail in the end, but also lead to the poison. So Miss Hellion, you must think twice before you act. Hellion Vivian saw that these old men were good people. She smiled and said, General Naylan? You can rest assured that I am friends with your family's Yezi. I won't gamble with your life, let alone do things that I am not sure of. The old General Naylan was stunned. He didn't know that his granddaughter, who disliked women, would have friends. Still too risky. The imperial doctor was also not sure. He only listened to Mrs. Instructions. He is indeed someone who understands medicine. Retired Emperor heard the commotion below. Taking advantage of the time when everyone's attention was on Wei Wei's body, he glanced sideways and quietly asked the youngster standing next to him without uttering a single word. She can really do it? Beligaju didn't speak. His fingers leisurely twirled around the white cloth in his hand. The retired emperor was helpless with his beloved grandson. He explained as if admitting defeat, It's not that this emperor doesn't believe in the princess you chose, but she still doesn't have martial chi on her body. Bailey Jiaju's lips curved into a smile. The words Princess Consort sounded pretty good. It's because she doesn't have martial chi on her body. So the matter of detoxification, as long as she can do it. Without martial chi, one wouldn't be affected by bone-eroding powder. Chapter 241. Pung. The bathtub fell. Eunuch's son politely asked Hellion Vivian, "Miss, the bathtub and wine are ready, what else?" "And firewood." Hellion Vivian ordered without looking up. "Yes." Eunuch's son hesitated for a moment and asked people to prepare these things that were supposed to be used for bathing. After the firewood was sent in, Hellion Vivian ordered people to boil water, and then let the retired emperor and the ministers all sit in the wooden tub. The scene was not so much saving people but steaming people with boiling water. Under the wooden tub was an iron frame, and below it was burning firewood. The firewood was burning more and more vigorously. After a while the room became full of steam. So far the ministers are in a state of dizziness. They only want to give medicine to a dead horse. They don't think that the little girl in front of them can really solve the problem. After Hellion Vivian saw that the water was boiling, she directly poured all the wine in the wine jar into the bathtub. It didn't take her more than half an hour to do these things. When a doctor saves people, no matter what he does, he looks particularly convincing. But, can you detoxify in this way? Eunuch's son looked at His Royal Highness eagerly. It's not safe, right? If something goes wrong, the retired emperor? Hellion Vivian was completely unaffected by others. She even asked Yuan Xiaoming to pick a tomato from the fantasy space to compensate for her physical strength. She stood lazily in the steam and reached out to wipe the temperature of the water in the wooden tub. Hellion Vivian casually took the medicinal materials brought by the imperial doctor and threw them into the bathtub one by one. The boiling water instantly rolled the herbs into the bottom of the tub. The smell of medicine in the room was getting stronger and stronger, which made Yuan Xiaoming feel choked when he breathed. "Woman, why do you put these messy things in? You don't need these things to detoxify them." The manipulative martial artist only needs to use internal force to expel the poison from their bodies. "I'm just making myself look more professional." Hellion Weiwei continued to toss in the medicinal herbs as she lazily replied, "Otherwise, if I detoxify them as soon as I make a move, everyone will know that I'm a combat-type martial artist. Now that I have another layer of identity as the Phoenix Girl, it's best not to expose my strength if I can. And it will show that my medical skills are superior." She didn't, okay. Yuan Xiaoming was convinced. He transformed into a virtual shadow and floated above Hellion Weiwei. When he glanced sideways at the side, that imperial physician was actually seriously remembering what kind of herbs Hellion Weiwei put in. He even clearly murmured what to put in first and what to put in later. He had an expression of, "I remember it all. What's going on?" Done. Hellion Weiwei put down the medicinal herbs in her hands, then sat on the ground. Her palms supported the outside of the wooden barrel, slightly exerting force. With the previous smell of wine and sweat, the poison overflowed from the wooden tub in just a second. The ministers looked at the black gas that surged out and knew that they were saved. They sat down, crossed their legs, and closed their eyes to rest. Hellion Vivian frowned. She felt that it was a waste of time to do it one by one. She simply put one hand on the side and at the same time she exerted force. In the boiling water, a silent airflow was formed above the tub. Everyone was silent about the detoxification and didn't notice it. Only Bailey Jiaju leisurely rotated his finger. The black ring emitted an ink-colored light, which was reflected in his long and narrow eyes, appearing exceptionally bright. He looked at Hellion Weiwei, who was using her internal energy, with a smile that was not a smile. This woman was like a bottomless mystery. He really wanted to know what kind of her he would see when he peeled off these mysteries layer by layer. Bailey Jiaju's thin lips curled up devilishly. Finally, the last person was detoxified by Hellion Vivian. The green color on his face faded, and he recovered his usual color. "Don't use your power now." Hellion Vivian stood up and brushed the dust off her body. She smiled and said, "Everyone's physical strength is still too weak. Wait until this stick of incense burns out, then we'll see." Being able to detoxify already made the ministers very surprised. Now they heard that they could recover their martial chi in just a stick of incense's time. Everyone couldn't help but look at Hellion Vivian. Although they weren't like those madams and misses in the boudoir who liked to talk about the rumors and slanders in the capital, they also knew that the eldest daughter of the Hellion family was someone who didn't know anything. But today she actually detoxified the bone-eroding poison that no one could detoxify. She pulled all of them back from the brink of death. The ministers didn't know how to describe their mood at this moment. They could only look at Hellion Vivian. For a moment, their hearts were like spilled seasonings. Sour, sweet, bitter, spicy, and salty, the taste was not ordinary. Girl, this time's great kindness, my Nayland family will never forget it. Old General Nayland was very heroic. In the future, if you need my Nayland family's help, just tell me at any time. Even Imperial Dr. Jiang, who was known as a magical hand, surrounded Hellion Vivian and said with enthusiasm, I didn't expect that the bone-eroding poison was actually solved in this way. By soaking in boiling water, the poison was eliminated from the pores. Those medicinal materials must have also played a role. Yuan Xiaoming laughed twice and said, This old man is so stupid and naive. You can shut up. After Hellion Vivian replied to Yuan Xiaoming's words with a stream of consciousness, she turned her head and said, Retired Emperor, I have other things to do. Since the poison has been detoxified now, my friend and I will leave first. Friend? Eunuch Sun's eyes automatically fell on his master. His Highness also wanted to follow? In the case that the retired emperor was seriously injured? You go first. Beligaju's side face was cold and handsome, and there was a smile on his face. I will stay here and rest for a while. Hellion Vivian frowned. Rest? Are you hurt? No. Beligaju seemed to be sleepy, and his slender fingers rubbed his eyes. It's just a night of walking, too tired. Hellion Vivian nodded and expressed her understanding. Then you wait for me here first. Okay. Beligaju's mouth slowly hooked up. Eunuch Sun watched on the side. He didn't say anything, but the villain in his heart jumped up and down. Pretending. His Highness is definitely pretending again. Right. Hellion Vivian, who was about to leave, looked at Beligaju and suddenly narrowed her eyes. When did your eyes recover? Beligaju's fingers paused, and he looked down calmly. When you cut your hand? I was wondering. Hellion Weiwei muttered. If he had recovered earlier, he wouldn't have let her hold his hand all the way back. Thinking about this, Hellion Weiwei turned her head and said to Eunuch Sun, Eunuch Sun, I'll have to trouble you to prepare a guest room for my friend. Let him sleep for a while, I'll be done very soon. The martial chi competition should not take long. It was time to let those who thought that driving her out of the family could cut off her opportunity to play in the competition completely give up. Chapter 242. Hellion Vivian saw that Eunuch Sun was looking at her table mate, and didn't answer her question. She raised her eyebrows and asked, Is Eunuch Sun in some trouble? Ah, Eunuch Sun recovered. Beligaju glanced at him and said faintly, I'll have to trouble Eunuch Sunday. Eunuch Sun choked and coughed heavily. No cough, no. Miss, don't worry. This old servant will make proper arrangements for your friend. That's good. Hellion Vivian arranged everything and went downstairs. Along the way, she took a set of men's clothing. Yuan Ming smiled evilly in the fantasy space. What? You still want to change? It's inconvenient to fight in a skirt. Hellion Vivian waved her long sleeves. She was handsome and elegant like jade. She looked at herself in the mirror and smiled handsomely. She turned her face and adjusted her collar. Then he casually walked into the noisy crowd. Eunuch Sun watched the familiar figure disappear before he dared to turn around and look at his master. Your Highness, Beligaju threw away the cloth in his hand. His clean eyes turned cold in an instant. Call the manager of the Phoenix restaurant over. Yes. Eunuch Sun trembled. He knew that His Highness was going to investigate the poisoning thoroughly. Beligaju's finger moved slightly. His silver mask was covered and his white robe fluttered. 18 shadows, listen to my order. This subordinate is here. Swish. Swish. 18 black shadows dropped their robes and knelt down on one knee. Beligaju's eyes were as cold as ice. Go investigate who's called Old Ghost. Yes. The shadows dispersed at the same time. Black feathers fell, leaving only Beligaju's back to the light. Ruthless, evil, indifferent and emotionless. The ministers were all dumbfounded when they saw the third prince slowly walking in. What was this situation? When Eunuch Sun went out, he was still with the White Academy student. When he came in, it was the third prince. Grandson came too late to save you. Beligaju's indifferent tone sounded a little lacking in sincerity. I hope Imperial Grandfather can forgive me. The retired emperor gently coughed a few times, but did not expose his identity. He said in a deep voice, "Sit down. What's the situation outside?" "Everything is normal." Beligaju paused for a moment before coldly ordering, "You can open the wooden window now." The guards obeyed the order and quickly stood by the window, guarding with swords to ensure that the retired emperor and the others could continue to watch the competition. The difference between the martial chi competition and other competitions was that the contestants selected from all over the country were usually lined up at the back. Their names were not read. Only their serial numbers were read. Therefore, not only the ordinary people, but even the elders of the four great families did not know that Hellion Vivian had been surrounded. However, there was one thing that the four great clans had been paying attention to. They were also looking for talents in this competition. Therefore, from the very beginning, they were waiting for the legendary little beggar to appear, because he had once spread the news that they would meet on the day of the martial chi competition. So far, there had not been any particularly noteworthy contestants on the test field. Except for Hellion Jiaoer, who had won first place in several rounds in a row, the rest of the platforms had been calm. It was not until Hellion Vivian, dressed in men's clothing, appeared that the referees who were recording began to slowly pay attention to her. They muttered in their hearts that this person's luck was a little too good. He had already won 3 rounds in a row. Originally, in a competition, one could advance by winning 2 out of 3 rounds. However, this person had not lost once since the beginning of the competition. Gradually, not only the referees, but even the contestants who were waiting to go on stage widened their eyes. No way. He won again. It's been 6 rounds. How come he has not shown any flaws at all? Who is this person? I've never seen him before. It's so strange. Why can't I feel his martial chi? Ah, I remember. Swish. As Hellion Vivian beautifully withdrew her leg, a big man with 2 hammers in his hands was kicked out of the platform in a parabolic curve. Under the platform, one of the contestants shouted excitedly, "It's him!" "Who?" "It's the beggar master who challenged the 4 big families by himself." "What? Look at his moves. He has no martial chi, but he won by surprise. In the world, except for that master, who else can be so powerful?" "It's really him." Everyone rubbed their eyes. Because they had seen the legendary master, their faces were full of a layer of enthusiasm. Their emotions were surging and their blood was boiling. This was the first time they had been so close to a master. Hellion Weiwei also didn't pay attention to the crowd's admiring and slightly surprised gazes. She only smiled lightly and stood with her bare hands. Facing the already dumbstruck competitors, she slightly curved her lips. Next, the north wind whistled past. She just stood on the wooden platform like that. Her every move was gentle and languid. Her back was slender like jade, which made people suddenly feel a kind of beauty like splashing ink. Some people themselves had great charm, not ostentatious, not eye-catching. Like snowflakes falling from the sky, cold and noble, silent, unique and unique. Standing on the high platform, Eunuch Sun opened his eyes wide. His eyes focused on the person on the platform. He finally understood why His Highness would treat this girl differently. This kind of commotion naturally attracted the attention of the group of people from White Academy. Those aristocratic young masters led by Murong Changfeng watched from afar with relish, so they followed along and walked over. Even Murong Changfeng unconsciously watched somewhat seriously. If this kind of master could be used by his Murong manner, it would be like adding wings to a tiger. Good. The recovered retired emperor stroked his beard and laughed deeply. This person is not bad. Yes. Eunuch Sun knew that retired emperor's eyesight was not good. What's more, they were separated by a distance. He really couldn't see that the person he said was not bad was the eldest daughter of the Hellion family. Retired emperor raised his eyebrows. What? You think it's not good? No. Eunuch Sun looked at his master's indifferent eyes and shook his head with all his might. He faced retired emperor and said, "It's because this old servant has never seen such a wonderful competition before." I was dumbstruck all of a sudden. Retired emperor nodded his head in satisfaction. Beligaju then withdrew his gaze from Eunuch Sun and drank a mouthful of tea with an indifferent expression. Between you and this person, who is more powerful? Retired Emperor's sudden question made all the ministers look over. Beligaju absent-mindedly turned the black jade thumb ring on his finger. The corners of his mouth were stained with a faint evil aura. Just as he was about to open his mouth, suddenly, a cry of surprise came from outside the window. Wait! Why does this master's back look so familiar? Chapter 243. Hellion May disagreed. She didn't even look in their direction. She smiled and said, "He's just an amateur. Even if he's good at martial arts, he won't be able to make a name for himself based on his background. It's probably because the rumors in the capital are too exaggerated. That's why he seems to be more powerful. How can he compare to my second sister? She's already won 10 matches in a row." When the young ladies heard this, they all nodded. Miss May Er's words are reasonable. If we were to go to that group, we might be able to win. We are all commoners from all over the place. How could we have any influence? As they spoke, they picked up the teacups in their hands and slowly took a sip. As for Hellion Jiao Er, who was sitting beside them, although she didn't say anything, her eyes were nevertheless brimming with pride. However, she didn't reveal it. Her face still carried a faint bashfulness. She had long since bewitched all the young masters until they were infatuated. However, the student who had exclaimed stood up immediately. "Something's wrong." "What's wrong? How can it be her? It can't be her." "Who is it?" "Hellion Vivian." As Hellion Vivian walked down the stage, the academy students' pupils shook heavily. Crash. The cup in Hellion Jiaoer's hand fell to the ground and rolled back and forth. She looked back in disbelief. Seeing Hellion Vivian in men's clothing, her face suddenly changed. How could this be? Wasn't this little slut already dead? Why would she appear in the martial chi competition? The expert who challenged the 4 great clans by herself isn't a beggar. She's Hellion Vivian. The academy student murmured, her voice getting louder and louder. Murong Chongfeng looked at the approaching figure with a sluggish expression. Wei Wei, on the other hand, lazily pulled open her collar and took a step forward. Her legs were very long and very thin. As she stood under the gradually dyed dusk sky, her back was straight and her posture was handsome and beautiful. Crash. Murong Chongfeng suddenly grabbed the jade pendant in his hand. He used so much strength that even his knuckles turned white. He felt that his breathing had obviously slowed down. His heartbeat was in disbelief as it slowly increased. Hellion Jiaoer's expression turned extremely ugly as she heard the thunderous discussion. Her face turned pale. Amidst the silence in the room, the retired emperor suddenly burst into laughter. Worthy of being the Hellion bloodline. It's been so many years to think that this girl could hold herself back. Good, very good. The ministers instantly lost their ability to speak. Originally, the fact that Hellion Vivian had cured the bone-corroding poison was already shocking enough. Now, someone actually told them that the master beggar who had once shocked the capital was Hellion Vivian. All of this sounded like a dream. Not only that, the most important thing was that she had won 7 or 8 matches in a row. Next, she was going to face those young ladies of the aristocratic families. In this round, the competition system would be different. The contestants would go up the stage according to their serial number and choose the opponent they wanted to challenge. Hellion Jiaoer narrowed her malicious eyes. She leaned over to Hellion May's ear and whispered something. Hellion May's eyes flashed as she waved towards those young ladies of the aristocratic families. Clang! The gong sounded and the final round officially began. Fong family's young lady was the first to go up the stage. Her voice was arrogant. "I choose number 151. 151? Wasn't that Hellion Vivian?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and stood up. Please. Fong family's young lady sneered. "You opened an armament shop and you think you're awesome after winning a few matches? Ha! You're just a little bastard." Hearing this, the originally languid Hellion Vivian's eyes tightened. No one could see her movements clearly. They only felt a gust of wind blow past. She had already grabbed Fong family's young lady's arm and fiercely pulled. Only a creak was heard. Fong family's young lady's lips turned white in an instant. The pain was like a tidal wave surging up violently. She looked at her soft arm but was unable to activate her martial chi. Her entire body was paralyzed on the stage. Hellion Vivian's eyes curved into half crescents as she looked down at her. Is it painful? It's right that it hurts. As she spoke, the crisp sound of bones breaking could be heard. Fong family's young lady was in so much pain that her eyes were staring straight ahead. Her face was pale and colorless. It was obvious that she had already lost this round, however. Hellion Vivian did not relax. Because just as she was about to walk back to the resting area, a second voice rang out. I choose number 151. Her again. Hellion Vivian suddenly turned around and looked at the arrogant young lady on the stage. Then she looked at Hellion Jiaoer, who was below the stage, and smiled. She narrowed her eyes. After the second round, Hellion Vivian won without a doubt. But after winning, she encountered the same situation as before. She had fought her way up from the preliminary round. Even if she wasn't tired, she would still be thirsty. Furthermore, the higher she fought, the stronger her opponent would be. Everyone had different martial chi attributes. Hellion Vivian had to constantly change her moves to ensure that she won all the way. It was obvious that they wanted to use this method of attrition battle to deplete her battle strength and stamina. Although there was no rule in the competition that said that they couldn't continuously challenge the same contestant. But this was too much. Wasn't this clearly bullying? The officials standing in the building couldn't help but sigh. But what surprised them was that the royal family, who had always been expressionless, had actually faded away from their usual indifference. A trace of cold light flashed through their deep well-like eyes. That light was like a sharp blade, causing people to feel a chill in their hearts. Aning, go and find out whose idea this was. Aning lowered his eyes respectfully. Yes. The officials standing at the side were flabbergasted. They really didn't understand. Did the royal family never interfere? Why did they speak up today? Beligaju's long and narrow eyes, other than the thick cold, there was a faint murderous aura. Hellion Vivian was his person. Even if she was bullied, only he could bully her. Clang! Another sound of the drum rang out. The referee naturally saw through the twists and turns, but he couldn't do anything because the competition still had to go on. Hellion Vivian didn't show any emotions. In her worldview, this method wasn't much. In the modern world, this kind of unfair thing was normal. This world was originally a world where the strong preyed on the weak. The winner was the king and the loser was the bandit. It was just that the methods were different. But did they really think that by doing this she would be at a loss? Insignificant tricks. They really underestimated her title as the Queen of Munitions. Hellion Vivian smiled and narrowed her eyes dangerously. She slightly curved her lips towards the referee. Referee, I just looked at the competition rules and made a decision. What decision? The referee frowned. Hellion Vivian looked at him and said word by word. I want to fight 1 against 10. Chapter 244. Hua. Once this was said, there was an uproar. The meaning of 1 against 10 was very simple. When the number of challengers reached 10, the one being challenged could choose to fight together. In that case, if they won this round, they could directly enter the finals. However, due to the harsh conditions, except for 10 years ago, after the Genius 3 halls had passed all the stages with the result of 1 against 10, this competition system had never been mentioned again. Now, at such a time, Hellion Weiwei actually proposed 1 against 10? Did she not want to live anymore? She was really stupid. Hellion Jiaoer sneered and gave Hellion Mei a look. Hellion Mei nodded and took the lead to fly up the stage. Following her were 2 young masters from aristocratic families and 7 young ladies from government officials. It was obvious that they wanted to take Hellion Vivian's life. However, Weiwei's face didn't change at all. Only the corners of her mouth curved into a smile that was dyed with a bit of evil. Woman, what are you planning now? Yuan Ming appeared. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. It's just a competition. What do you mean by what I'm planning now? Yuan Ming raised his eyebrows. It was obvious that he did not believe her. At this moment, those 10 people had already started to use their martial chi, and were about to pounce on Hellion Vivian. This made Eunuch Sun break out in cold sweat for her. All along, Hellion Vivian had been using close combat. In close combat, if it was 1 against 1, it would bring out the greatest effect. But if it was 1 against 10, close combat would only cause Helly and Vivian to die faster. Everyone held their breaths. Their eyes were filled with nervousness as they watched the battle unfold in the ring. However, what they did not expect was that the 10 people, including Helly and May, could not bring out a trace of wind with their punches. Helly and May stared blankly at her hand. When she looked up again, Helly and Vivian had already appeared beside her like a phantom. With a cool flying kick, she kicked her off the stage. When the other contestants saw this, they hurriedly circulated their chi, only to find that there was no way to gather the chi in their dantian. What was going on? The remaining few people looked at each other. Before they could communicate with each other, Helly and Vivian was already like a sword out of its scabbard, dashing through the crowd. She grabbed one of the people's arm and exerted force creak. At the same time, Helly and Wei abruptly flipped over, her black hair fluttering in the wind. She lifted one of her legs and in an instant, struck the body of the man who came against the wind, kicking him to a place a meter away. Bang bang bang. However, the people who came to challenge her were all lying under the stage, painfully clutching their stomachs. In addition to their whole body going soft, they did not notice that their chi was being drained. This was the effect of the cultivation dissipation powder. It could invisibly dissolve the chi in the martial artist's body without being noticed by the martial artist. Of course, this did not mean that Helly and Vivian did not know. Even Yuan Ming thought of something, his eyes slightly narrowed. So that's how it is. Woman, you noticed that they were also poisoned, so you let them come together, right? In vain they wanted to join hands to teach me a lesson. Of course, I have to give them a little gift in return. Helly and Vivian smiled coldly. Her appearance was like a smiling demon walking in hell. Yuan Ming also laughed. It is estimated that in less than half an incense, they will be poisoned. This is going to be interesting. Helly and Vivian did not comment and stood straight. Her left hand was raised by the referee, representing an absolute victory. The crowd had exploded. They opened their eyes wide and looked at Helly and Vivian on the stage. 1 against 10? She actually won. People always say that the eldest daughter of the Hellian family is a shameless waste. Usually, in addition to following behind Murong young master, she does not know how to do anything. Not to mention that she is ugly, even her usual behavior is arrogant and despotic, which makes people unable to look at her. But today they saw with their own eyes what kind of woman she is. Unyielding, neither servile nor overbearing, quite a general's style. However, what is worrying is that she has begun to thoroughly expose her fatal weakness, that is, she has never shown her chi. This is a very bad phenomenon for a martial artist, especially when your opponent is a master of the martial arts of the golden rank. Hellian Jiaoer saw this point and walked on the stage with a smile. Her mouth had a soft and weak shyness. Her appearance easily aroused the desire of men to protect her. Therefore, for her to come on stage at this time, people only thought it was a coincidence and would not associate these conspiracies with her. Elder sister. Hellian Jiaoer let out a long sigh and looked at Hellian Wei, as if she couldn't bear to do so. I also didn't want to take advantage of the situation, but the competition rules are like this, I can only come up. However, if you want to give up the competition, it's not too late now. You can go and talk to the referees and ask them to let you leave. Helly and Vivian sneered. If you really do not want to take advantage of others, why did you not even give me time to drink a sip of water and come on stage? Hellian Jiaoer was choked by her words and her expression changed. The faint smile also stiffened at the corner of her mouth. The suspicious eyes of the people below the stage made her take a deep breath. Bang! The drums sounded. Hellian Jiaoer brushed past her with a smile on her face, but the words that came out of her mouth could only be heard by the two of them. See if I don't kill you this time. Hellian Vivian walked past her and did not even look at her. This bitch dares to ignore me. Hellian Jiaoer clenched her left hand. As soon as the drums stopped, she narrowed her eyes and her whole body shone with a golden light. The martial chi in the air was like a roaring sea, so vast that it could not be detected. That is, the people below the stage gasped. Their mouths and eyes slowly widened. They stared at Hellian Jiaoer and their voices were full of surprise. Gold Stage 9. I can't believe that Hellian Jiaoer's cultivation has reached such a high level. One must know that in the Great Huang Dynasty, there were only a few people who could reach the gold stage. Those who could reach gold stage 5 were even rarer. Helian Jiao Air, on the other hand, had cultivated to level 9. She could reach the peak of the gold stage with just one more stage. As expected of the legendary genius, the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl, Helian Jiao really lives up to her name. This also meant that Helian Wei's chances of winning against the other party were extremely slim. It was even possible that she, who did not have any martial qi, would lose to Helian Jiao. The two women coldly faced each other on the stage. No one knew who would tear the other apart in the next second. Suddenly, Helian Jiao waved her long sword, bringing out layers of waves. Haze cut off all light. Chapter 245. A strange black fog rose up behind Helian Vivian. All the light seemed to be absorbed in an instant. Suddenly everything turned pitch black. Nothing could be seen, nothing could be heard. The arena had become extremely quiet. Helian Vivian was shrouded in it. She couldn't even tell the direction, let alone see Helian Jiao's actions. Just when everyone thought Helian Vivian was dead for sure, a figure suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Suddenly a figure walked out of the black fog. Her long hair fluttered in the wind, and her eyes shone brightly. It was as if the surrounding martial qi had no effect on her. Helian Jiao's eyes suddenly shook. She reached out to defend, wanting to take this opportunity to kill Helian Vivian. Unexpectedly, her opponent grabbed the sharp edge of her sword. Wei didn't seem to care in the slightest that her finger was cut. She suddenly exerted force and pulled Helian Jiao's entire body in front of her. Then, she spun around like a whirlwind. Her slender leg was lifted up high, and she gave him a side kick. Bam! That kick was like a thunderbolt. The sound of the wind cutting through the air was so loud that it was ringing in the ears of the audience. There was no extra movement at all. It was just a beautiful kick. The figure that was sent flying drew a high arc in the air. Heavily, she fell on the arena. Helian Jiao lay on the cold ground. Her eyes were dark and she didn't feel any pain. She was so confused that she didn't know what had happened. After a long time, the dizziness slowly dissipated. The audience was in an uproar. A person without qi actually defeated an expert who was about to reach the peak of the gold rank. This was unheard of. Wait, look at what's on her body. That's qi. That's right, it was qi. There was almost no qi, but it formed a stream of air. It turned into wisps of wind that surrounded Helian Vivian, forming a faint barrier. Unlike other people's gas, the gas surrounding her did not have any color. What kind of attribute was this? Everyone looked at each other. Other than shock, there was also disbelief. Sitting in the private room, a black-haired man in ivory-white clothes curled his thin lips, and there was a hint of playfulness on his gentle and elegant face. Master. A black shadow descended, its fingernails black. The plan failed. The man took a sip of tea and did not seem to be surprised by this result. His eyes fell slightly and his voice was deep. I understand. You may leave. Yes. The shadow hesitated for a while and said, then should we give the antidote to the young ladies and young masters who drank the tea? The man narrowed his eyes. No need. I want to see who cured my bone-corroding poison. Yes. The black shadow retreated in a flash. As the sun set, Helian Vivian stood on the stage and looked down at Helian Jiao, who had been kicked off the stage by her. Her side profile looked extraordinarily handsome. Murong Changfeng was standing below the stage. This was the first time he looked at Helian Vivian so seriously. For the first time, he put down his grudges and looked at her. This woman was willing to sacrifice anything for him since she was young. She could do anything. Her eyes never left his body for a moment. She was so silly that it made people feel suffocated. But now, she raised her small face and stood at the peak of the experts. His figure was not in her eyes. At this moment, Murong Changfeng felt as if his eyes were being stung. Regret swept through his whole body like a tide. Helian Vivian still stood there. The dazzling golden light shone in her eyes, shining beautifully. Hua! A thunderous applause sounded. Helian Vivian became famous in one battle. Helian Jiao, who was lying on the ground, only felt pain in her internal organs. Compared to the pain in her body, what made her feel even more breathless was that she had actually lost. From birth until now, there had never been a day when she had been so humiliated. Helian Jiaoer tightly clenched her teeth. She looked like a dog eating shit. She didn't look like a young and inexperienced beauty anymore. Her small face was gloomy and her hair was messy. She looked even more unsightly than the servant girl who wanted to help her up. Get lost. She couldn't take advantage of Helian Vivian, so Helian Jiaoer took it out on the servant girl beside her. Before she could stand still, she slapped her. The maidservant cried out in pain. Everyone couldn't help but look at her. Their eyes were full of meaning, as if they were saying, "So it turns out that the second miss of the Helian family was like this in private." She was worse than a shrew. Realizing what she'd done, Helian Jiaoer immediately retracted her hand. The light in her eyes turned as she lightly shouted, "You little girl, what kind of thoughts do you have? Eldest sister's win is a win. No matter what kind of methods she used, I'm willing to accept my loss. The one who's hateful is you. How dare you instigate me to find trouble with eldest sister?" "Me, miss?" The servant girl didn't know why her miss would suddenly say such a thing. She timidly replied, "This servant won't dare to do it again." After these words, those who lost to Helian Vivian also had a lively idea in their hearts. Naturally, they wanted to find some face for themselves. Their fingers pressed on their injured arms and shouted at the referee, "This competition is not fair. We request to measure Helian Vivian's martial chi value." Helian Vivian only looked at them with a faint smile. The corner of her mouth carried a faint ridicule. However, those people felt that something was wrong. First, they had difficulty circulating their martial chi. Then, there was the colorless and transparent chi surrounding Helian Vivian. When the crystal ball was tested, there wasn't the slightest bit of martial chi in her body. But now it became so powerful. She simply used some method that they didn't know about. 10 or so students took advantage of this matter to make a ruckus and asked the referee to redo it. The referees were in a terrible fix because of this situation. Suddenly, one of the most noisy girls reached out and covered her left chest. Her face was ashen as she fell to the side, followed by an ear-piercing scream. People looked at the girl and took a big step back. What the hell is going on? Another young master was smarter. After seeing the girl's appearance, his first reaction was to check his own pulse. At this time, he found that there was not much martial chi left in his body. "It's the cultivation dissipation powder. It must be the cultivation dissipation powder." One after another, all 10 of them put their fingers on their own meridians, shaking their heads in a daze. "No, there is not only the cultivation dissipation powder. There is also the bone-eroding poison." Some of them had studied alchemy. According to their own reaction, they quickly knew the seriousness of the matter. The bone-eroding poison was like this. At first there was no reaction, but after a reaction, everything was too late. That person suddenly panicked. "What should we do? What should we do? There is no antidote for the bone-eroding poison. Plus we just used our own martial chi." Hung! Before he could finish his sentence, another one of the 10 fell to the ground. Chapter 246. Seeing this scene, 2 or 3 ministers who were originally sitting in the Phoenix building couldn't hold back anymore. They quickly walked over and held up their suffering grandchildren. One of them anxiously looked at Helian Vivian. Quickly detoxify this old man's granddaughter." Helian Vivian's eyes turned cold. "Why should I detoxify her just because you said so?" That minister was stunned. He was as anxious as a headless fly. Seeing this, Helian Jiaoer's eyes turned. She endured the pain in her body and interrupted. "Since Big Sister can detoxify this poison, why don't you help? It's just a matter of convenience." "Big Sister, why are you so unreasonable?" Helian Weiwei sneered. "Don't understand human feelings? Why should I detoxify a group of people who helped you frame me?" "You." Helian Jiaoer's face changed. "Big Sister, there are some words that you can't say. When did I frame you? Just because I was the last one to appear?" Helian Vivian narrowed her eyes and smiled faintly. "Whether you did or not, you know in your heart. They also know in their hearts." That minister had already seen everything clearly from upstairs. He grabbed Helian Vivian's sleeve. "Miss Helian Vivian, this old man is begging you. In this world only you can detoxify this poison. This old man is left with only one woman. Please do a good deed, do a good deed. When the rest of the students heard this, they also looked at Helly and Vivian. The fear of death made them show an unprecedented panic. What they regretted the most was listening to Helly and Jiaoer and Helly and May's words and joining hands to attack Helly and Vivian. Usually they looked down on this woman the most. But today, whether they lived or died was in her hands. With such a big thing happening, the retired emperor couldn't be indifferent. The poison people were the descendants of the court officials. He had to come over. But when he heard Helly and Vivian's words, he felt that it was tricky. This girl was different from everyone he had met. In her eyes there was no such thing as imperial power. Therefore, even the retired emperor had to soften his tone. Wei Wei, this emperor will naturally uphold justice for them. However, even if this bone-eroding poison is cured, the ones who will suffer will be those of the older generation. Helly and Vivian glanced at the retired emperor and said in a flat tone, I won't help those who look down on me and even want to frame me. That year, my mother went beyond the Great Wall alone and saved the hostages of several families. When she died, those people didn't even say a single word of thanks to her. As she spoke, her gaze swept over the crowd inch by inch. Not only that, they even took the opportunity to step on you a few times. The people who were chosen by Helly and Vivian couldn't help but tremble. Out of the 10 people, 3 of them were the descendants of the participants from that year. Helly and Vivian looked at them with a sneer. In this world, there is always a need to pay attention to karma. It's not that there isn't retribution, it's just that the time hasn't come yet. When the ministers heard the last sentence, they repented and took a step back. However, they didn't dare to speak of the matter of that year. They were afraid that it would affect their own careers. But when they saw the ashen faces of their grandchildren, the 3 ministers felt so uncomfortable that they almost died. They were their flesh and blood. Since you hate us so much, why did you detoxify us just now? The minister's face was ashen, as if he had aged more than 10 years. Helly and Vivian walked over and smiled like a demon. Didn't you also treat me like this in the past? The ministers weren't stupid. When they heard this sentence, they understood Helly and Vivian's meaning. She did it on purpose. She deliberately saved them and let them watch their grandchildren's lives in danger, but they were helpless. Woman, you are really ruthless. However, Yuan Ming's thin lips curved up. I like it. The more ruthless and ingenious the revenge, the more his demonic nature would expand. Before long, he would be able to recover all of his vitality. That would be the best. Helly and Vivian wasn't affected in the slightest. She raised a hand and slowly tied her sleeve. I said before, since they want to join hands to teach me a lesson, of course I have to give them a little gift in return. Sister Wei Wei, you don't have to save the 3 of them. We have never framed Madame Hellion. One of the poison people looked at Helly and Vivian in a flattering manner. Sister Wei Wei is the most clear-minded. You definitely won't involve the innocent. Helly and Vivian looked at her and suddenly smiled. Oh? Then you guys challenged me one by one. It wasn't framing me? That person's expression stiffened. In order to survive, she simply pointed at Helly and May and Helly and Jiaoer at the side and said, this is all their idea. We were just instructed by others, Sister Wei Wei. This is really not what we want to do. Linger, what nonsense are you talking about? Helly and Jiaoer, whose scheme had been exposed, instantly had some unnatural panic. However, earlier on, when everyone fell down one after another, she already knew that there was something fishy going on. Because of these fishy things, she thought of an exceptionally excellent method that could put Wei Wei to death. She pressed her painful mouth and said with a guiding voice, Ling don't be led away by others. Don't you think it's strange? There is obviously no antidote for bone erosion. Why does Big Sister have the antidote? When the ministers heard this, they knew that something was wrong. They wanted to speak up to stop Helly and Jiaoer. However, Helly and Vivian said, shut up, let her continue. The ministers were anxious, but they did not dare to move. They were afraid that if Helly and Vivian was unhappy, she would not save their grandson. Helly and Jiaoer cautiously glanced at that official, and swallowed her words back into her stomach. I've finished speaking. Eldest sister, don't take it too seriously. I'm only curious. There are so many people in this martial arts competition, yet you're the only one with the antidote for the bone-corroding poison. Hearing this, many people looked at Helly and Vivian suspiciously. Hellion Vivian coldly curved her thin lips. You want to say that this poison was put by me, so that's why I have the antidote? Big sister. Hellion Jiaoer pretended to be surprised. That's what you said, I don't mean that. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows, is that so? But it's a pity that I don't have the antidote. It's just that the martial qi I cultivate is special, so I know the antidote for bone erosion. You can continue to frame me, but you're just wasting these people's time. After saying this, everyone looked at Hellion Jiaoer with condemnation in their eyes. Even the ministers were anxious. Hellion Jiaoer, can you not be so nosy? Saving people is more important. Hellion Jiaoer had never been disliked like this before. Her face was pale, and she bit her thin lips and insisted, I just think it's strange. Speaking of which, I have something I want to ask you. Chapter 247. Hellion Weiwei strolled over, her eyes gleaming. I've noticed since just now that you've always liked the tea at Phoenix Restaurant, and you're a regular customer here. This time, not only did you bring your own cup, you even asked the servant girl to bring you a pot of water? Having heard what was said, Hellion Jiaoer's entire body froze. She originally wanted to use the bone-eroding poison as a final counterattack. Because she really lost face today. Not only did she lose to this slut in the martial qi competition, but she also fell to the point where she was despised because of her. This was even more unbearable than killing her. However, she didn't expect that Hellion Vivian would notice these details. She suddenly felt a sense of regret, as if she had slapped herself in the face. The retired emperor was very smart. When he heard this, he frowned and was furious. What exactly is going on? Hellion Jiaoer had long forgotten that the retired emperor was here. At this time she realized the seriousness of the problem. She was so scared that her body trembled. She knelt on the ground and reached out to pull the maid beside her. The maid trembled and said, It's because Miss is not feeling well recently and it's not suitable for her to drink tea. This servant prepared a pot of water. As for the rest, this servant really doesn't know anything. That's too much of a coincidence. Today's poisoning was obviously planned. Your miss is not feeling well at this time and it's not suitable for her to drink tea. So she brought her own cup and water and acted like she didn't know anything. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and moved closer to the maid's face. Tell me, do you think people will believe such a story? Of course they wouldn't believe it. No one was a fool, especially those ministers who were anxious to save people. The way they looked at Hellion Jiaoer had completely changed. The retired emperor glared at Hellion Jiaoer with anger in his eyes. Hellion Jiaoer panicked in her heart and looked at Hellion Mei, who was lying on the ground in unbearable pain. Suddenly she thought of something. Retired emperor is wise. If Jiaoer really knew something, then my younger sister wouldn't have been poisoned. Hellion Mei groaned in pain. She didn't have the strength to speak and listen to the ins and outs of the matter. A wave of hatred rushed to her head. No. Second sister was lying. She knew that the tea was poisonous, so her mother asked them to bring their own teapots. However, she didn't tell him anything and just watched as he drank the tea. However, she had no way to expose her. Hellion Mei knew better than anyone else that if she spoke now, it would implicate her mother. That was something she didn't want to see. Therefore, she could only swallow her hatred. However, what Hellion Jiaoer didn't notice was that Hellion Mei was looking at her in a different light. At this point, it was impossible to find out who had poisoned him. The ministers were not interested in finding out who poisoned them. All they wanted was for Hellion Weiwei to detoxify their grandchildren as soon as possible. However, it was clear that Hellion Vivian had no intention of making a move. This made the retired emperor ponder for a moment before he said, Weiwei, tell me, what do you want to detoxify them? As long as they admit to their crimes and reveal the mastermind behind it. Hellion Vivian smiled, making everyone hold their breath. This was impossible. 3 of the ministers had ugly expressions on their faces. The others were indignant. Lord Yuan, Lord Li, do you want these children to go to hell because of the crimes you committed? The ministers still didn't speak. Once they spoke, it wouldn't just be the death of a grandson or granddaughter, but the entire family would be implicated. Hellion Jiaoer was afraid that they would be swayed and turned her head to look at Wei Wei. Eldest sister, no matter what, these people are still your schoolmates. Are you really going to watch them die and not save them? Younger sister. Helian Weiwei looked at Helian Jiao Er and suddenly laughed. Speaking of which, these things all happened because of you. If it wasn't because you wanted to find someone to join hands with to teach me a lesson, they also wouldn't have used their martial qi to such an extent. You're the main culprit. How can you remove yourself so cleanly? Helian Jiao was completely speechless by Helian Vivian's words. Helian Weiwei saw that those ministers didn't speak. Her thin lips curved into a half smile. The three lords are used to being heartless and unscrupulous, even disregarding the life of their own grandsons. Then don't blame me for not saving them. As for the other 7, whether they can live or not, it will depend on this younger sister's attitude. What I hate the most is that evil people who obviously did something evil but still pretend to be innocent. As long as Helian Jiao Er kneels down and kowtows to me 3 times, and personally says what I just instructed you, I will save them. From the beginning, Helian Vivian had said that compared to killing people, Helian Jiao would be more painful to be skinned in front of so many people, so that her ugliness wouldn't be able to hide. Helian Jiao covered her swollen face and continued to weep in denial. Eldest sister, why do you have to be so ruthless towards me? You have repeatedly found people to frame me. Isn't that cruel? Helian Vivian looked at her indifferently. Or do you want to leave me in the lurch for the sake of your own reputation? When everyone heard this, they all looked at Helian Jiao. Under great pressure, Helian Jiao could only clench her teeth and put on a brave face. I didn't mean that. Then kowtow and admit your mistake. Helian Vivian's eyes fell on her body like icicles. Helian Jiao bent her knees little by little, and bit her lips so hard that they bled. Bang! 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 3 kowtows. Helian Jiao couldn't wait to leave after kowtowing. Helian Vivian looked a little indifferent. You haven't told me why they only pointed at me when I stood on the stage. Yes, I asked them to do so. Helian Jiao took a deep breath and her voice was as soft as a mosquito's buzzing. Helian Vivian smiled. It seems that younger sister is still not sincere enough. You didn't say it clearly and still hummed. You. Helian Jiao clenched her hands and looked like she couldn't wait to pounce on Helian Vivian and bite her to death. However, the ministers were really anxious. Miss Jiao, speak louder, speak more clearly. My granddaughter's life is in your hands. Helian Jiao had no choice but to close her eyes tightly and say, the reason why these people chose you when they went up was because I asked them to do so. As she spoke, she cried again, wanting to gain more sympathy from others. We didn't violate the rules of the competition. This shouldn't be enough to punish me. Elder sister asked me to apologize, so I apologized. She asked me to kowtow, so I kowtowed. As long as you can save everyone, we can talk about anything. Helian Jiao was beautiful to begin with. When she cried like this, there was a little bit of weeping beauty that made people unable to bear to see her weak. Many people began to soften and looked at Helian Jiao with a little sympathy in their eyes. At this time, a cold and indifferent voice slowly sounded. It was low and deep and very pleasant to the ears. Almost instantly, it caught everyone's ears. Chapter 248. Now that I think about it, you do have a little bit of credit. Everyone turned their heads. They saw Beligaju walking over from a distance. His black robes fluttered in the wind, looking indolent and sexy. He looked like a noble young master who had just walked out of a painting. His eyes were cold and indifferent. There was a faint light in his eyes, 10% affectionate and 90% emotionless. His thin lips were curled up, and he wore a silver mask on his face. His long black hair fluttered in the wind, giving people a feeling that he was both good and evil. Then he tilted his head, bit off the white gloves on his hands, and gently spat them to the side. This kind of Beligaju was often the most deadly. It was easy for him to win the infatuation of young girls. But those who were familiar with him knew that whenever he entered this state, it was time to deal with people. He never showed mercy when he whipped corpses. Also, there was one more thing. His methods were very special. From the moment she saw Beligaju appear, the Helian Jiao's thoughts were in chaos. Her heartbeat quickened as she brushed the strands of hair by her ear. She raised her watery eyes and looked at Beligaju affectionately. Your Highness. She thought that this kind of attitude would make her look more innocent and pitiful. After all, His Highness had always liked this kind of girl. Didn't that lowly servant girl from before rely on this to make His Highness take her seriously? The current situation was an excellent opportunity for her. Thinking about it carefully, this person had never paid attention to her before. Today was the first time that His Highness had spoken to her. The Hellion Jiaoer felt that her chance had finally come. She was about to say something. She then heard Bailey Jiaju continue, "Other than you, I have rarely seen anyone who is so self-righteous after murdering someone. However, since you feel that you have contributed, I will reward you with something." The Hellion Jiaoer stuttered and opened her mouth. At this time, she realized that Baligaju didn't even look at her. "Eunuch's son, give the order." Baligaju's gaze lightly swept over the crowd. His voice was devilishly cold. "From today onwards, the Huai Manor will have 2 concubines. Tell them to prepare an additional betrothal gift and send it to Madame Su, do you understand?" Eunuch's son was stunned at first, then hesitantly looked at the retired emperor's expression. He saw that the retired emperor didn't have any objections. He nodded and said, "Yes. His Highness, how is this a reward? This is simply sending people to their deaths." Moreover, he was still mentioning the betrothal gifts. Was he doing this on purpose? Hellion Vivian also felt that it was a little strange to mention the betrothal gift at this time. She couldn't help but glance at Baligaju. His Highness, on the other hand, was as cold as ice from beginning to end. He was so cold and indifferent that no one could guess what he was thinking. "Your Highness!" Hellion Jiaoer cried out with a pale face. How could you? Baligaju coldly raised his eyebrows. "You want to defy the decree?" Hellion Jiaoer looked at the ministers with a panicked expression. The ministers were more or less afraid of the elders of the 4 great families. They knew that they especially valued Hellion Jiaoer, so they spoke up. "Your Highness, it's not good to bestow such a hasty marriage. If Prime Minister Su and the people of the general's residence know..." Baligaju didn't wait for them to finish speaking. Instead, he called out Hellion Vivian's name with his thin lips half curved. Hellion Vivian hummed in response. Thinking about it carefully, this seemed to be the first time a certain highness called her name. Why did that tone sound like he was ordering a cat or a dog? It was just that the ending tone was a little soft, which made it hard to refuse. "Take note of him. See who among the poisoned people is his grandson. Just let them die." Baligaju's tone was very indifferent. It was this kind of indifference that made the minister's hair stand on end from the bottom of their hearts. The entire venue fell into a dead silence. No one dared to open their mouths again, afraid that the royal family would make an example out of them. Only Hellion Vivian responded with a light smile. "Okay." She looked like she wasn't afraid of Baligaju at all, lazily curling her lips. The 2 people stood upright under the setting sun. One was as cold as a fairy, the other had a faint smile like a devil. It looked like they complemented each other a little. However, it was like this that the 2 people joined forces, which made people a little breathless. Originally, Hellion Vivian alone was enough to make the ministers fearful. Now, there was the addition of the royal family. The ministers looked at each other, cold sweat dripping down their foreheads. When the Hellion Jiaoer saw that the situation was not right, she swallowed the blood in her mouth and forced a smile. "Jiaoer doesn't have any intention of disobeying the decree. It's just that young Master Huai and has already married third sister. I'm afraid that if we do this, third sister will feel uncomfortable." As she spoke, Hellion Jiaoer turned towards Hellion Mei, whose face had turned green, and looked over. What she wanted was for her to say a few words. This kind of singing and matching, maybe she could help her out of this predicament. After all, they used to cooperate like this. However, what she didn't expect was, Hellion Mei unexpectedly laughed. Her voice was so deep and hoarse that it made people who heard it feel extremely terrifying. "Second older sister is truly overthinking things. How could I feel uncomfortable? You and I have been together since we were young. If we can also live together in the future, then that couldn't be better. You can rest assured that after you marry over, you won't need to come to my house every day to offer tea. Even if you become a concubine, I will still let my husband take care of you a bit more." Hearing this, the Hellion Jiaoer widened her eyes as if she had seen a ghost. "Third sister, are you crazy? Second sister, why are you so agitated?" Hellion Mei looked at her coldly. "What you meant just now, could it be that if I agreed, You would comply with the imperial edict and marry me. Because of Hellion May's words, the Hellion Jiaoer could no longer maintain her image. Regardless of who was around, she stood up and shouted, Hellion May, you are crazy. You are really crazy. Who wants to marry a eunuch? You are asking for it. Who told you to have a secret relationship with Huayan? How can I compare to you? I am the treasure in the hands of father and mother. How can you drag me into this? Turns out that second sister thinks of me like this. Hellion May spilled blood from the corner of her mouth. Now you, the treasure, will fall into hell with me. Second sister, don't worry, when we go to the Hui family, I will repay you well. Hearing Hellion May's words, the Hellion Jiaoer really didn't understand what happened to her. Could it be? Was it because of that cup of tea? After Hellion Jiaoer reacted, she turned to look at Hellion May again. Her familiar gaze disappeared and was replaced by a hatred that corroded the bones and penetrated the flesh. Third sister, listen to me.